Hello. Check. Check 2. B. Ch. That's my new mic check technique. 3 years in, we're expanding. We're expanding the mic check technique. Gotta check that mic. And do all the different sounds. So we know that the mic is working properly. Gotta keep things fresh. It sounds good. Good to know. Good to know. What's up, friends? Rob ASMR stream went. I think every stream is a ASMR stream over here. I think that's kind of part of my whole thing. What is this? Friday the 13th movie? Very spoopy. Very spoopy, folks. Didn't mean to freak you out there. Too scary. Okay, we'll dial it back. We're gonna dial it back. What is going on, friends? I just realized I sat down without any kind of beverage. So perhaps I should go get a beverage before we really get started here. Huh? What do you think? Beverage? Is it beverage time? I think it is. Oh, I have another energy drink. I forgot. Oh my goodness. What a delight. What a delight. I forgot I had another one. Just one moment, folks. Okay. I'm back. Ready to get going now. Ready to start. I'm ready to go. Got another one of these bad boys. I got another. I think this is my third in as many days. I'm getting hooked. I'm gonna re-hooked on Rain Total Body Fuel. We're going all the way back to the beginning of this program. One of the first memes that we all remember. Rob's gonna work himself into a shoot and become the next Mr. Rogers and never to get back on the FP. The world needs a socialist Mr. Rogers, though. That could be a good shtick. Right? I'm going to be in my 40s soon. I could pivot to that. I could be less confrontational, less edgy. Maybe just soften the edges a little bit without softening the analysis. That's a space that I could carve out for myself. Hello, neighbor. Chin chin, everybody. Canada already has a Mr. Rogers and aka Red Green, but not a Canadian Mr. Rogers that upholds Stalin, though. That would be kind of where I take it into a bit of a different direction. in theory, as a joke, as a meme, just as a joke, you talk to us directly through the screen. That's right. Well, neighbor, I know that there's a lot of criticism of the Soviet system. The Soviet system under Stalin, who's been painted by history that's taught in the West as being a horrible monster, on par with Hitler or any other of the most genocidal dictators. But I think we do need to understand the historical and material context that some of these actions were taken, folks. The Soviet Union was under imperialist threat from moment one, from the moment the Russian Revolution happened. It was under threat from civil war, from civil war, imperialist invasion. The Western powers immediately coalesced to try and overthrow the socialist system as soon as it was implemented, folks. If there wasn't a CIA, there didn't need to be a KGB. A lot of the violence that we saw in the Soviet system wasn't a direct response to the reality that was being constantly undermined by the imperialist powers. You know, that kind of a thing. I know that's not me doing Mr. Rogers. That's me doing a Mr. Rogers-esque character. Okay? Just so we're clear, that wasn't an official attempt. That wasn't an official attempt. On that subject today, I actually do want to get into some very historically illiterate people and some takes that we've been seeing lately. Talking about how Jordan Peterson has been upheld as this like public intellectual, the right's answer to this kind of public academic intellectual. And how not only just stupid that he is, he's not a smart man, but just historically illiterate as well. Like really rails constantly against Marxism and socialism, and really has displayed time and time again that he hasn't read any of the writers that he criticizes, that he blames for the deaths of millions of people. He really doesn't. He hasn't done the reading.
You can count on
he doesn't understand.
Good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Tiniest Boop, thank you very much for the gifted sub. Thank you, Tiniest Boop. I appreciate that. He's not done the homework. And in some ways, that's kind of relatable, you know? It's kind of relatable in a way to like agree to debate a person about someone without having any fucking clue of what you're talking about. Just what you've read secondhand from like some... or heard secondhand in like a movie. There was some stuff from him. There was a very funny take from a CBC guy I saw today. I think there's some bad socialism takes we can take a look at. He didn't understand the assignment, nor did he do it. He didn't understand it. He didn't do it. He doesn't know what's going on. It's not good. Dang, the concept of living within a 15-minute walk. Sorry, that's my own. The TikTok website is very strange. Sometimes it just like does things without me having any understanding of why. I blame Joe Rogan for amplifying this moron. He's such a clout chaser. Well, really, and like in the context of this whole sort of trans hysteria as well. His rise as this like public figure is totally inseparable from the rise of the trans panic, because he rode that wave to like conservative stardom by just being a professor and just like basically obstinately refusing to just treat students with basic dignity. Like and suggesting that asking him to respect people's preferred pronouns is actually some vicious assault against his integrity and his freedom. You know, that's the reason that he has a big platform now. Texas, I think that's a kind of a weird statement to make, considering the ways that Cuba, like Fidel himself and Cuba, have like openly talked about the transition that's happened between welcoming these communities and supporting them and supporting social justice and LGBTQ rights. Cuba just passed one of the most progressive family laws in the world when it comes to LGBTQ issues, including trans issues. Fidel himself openly talked about his evolution on that. Like, you're talking about people at a time who had regressive attitudes about LGBTQ people when that was widespread throughout the world. It wasn't some symbol of socialism. It wasn't part of like any kind of socialist doctrine. These views were widespread, very unfortunate, but widespread. And Cuba, like Fidel himself, evolved on it and openly talked about that. Cuba evolved on it. We can look at Cuba's family laws that they put in place is one of the most progressive such laws in the world. Significantly more progressive than the way we treat these communities in our country. Also, as we've talked about, going after people that were trying to, in academia and elsewhere, trying to break down these kinds of gender hierarchies was one of the first things, as we talked about yesterday, was one of the very first things that the fascist movement in Weimar Germany was trying to accomplish. You know, it was going after specifically LGBTQ people, along with Jews, of course, socialists, which they all viewed as kind of being part of some far-reaching Bolshevik conspiracy. You know, all these groups. So you can point out socialist societies in the past that weren't great on that issue, but the fact that like actually targeting these communities with state violence was a central tenet of the fascist movement and the Nazis. And you've seen how socialist countries around the world have evolved and embraced these rights long before we ever thought about embracing them in the West. Like, we only started accepting gay marriage in our society like 10 years ago. We're not some like amazing progressive society that's always been great on these issues. Our society was deeply homophobic and deeply transphobic, and still is to this day, even though there's a few legal protections that have now been extended to these groups. Still deeply reactionary places that are extremely hostile to these groups overall, as we're seeing with the trans panic that's going on right now. Like, the trans panic that we're seeing right now is not happening in Cuba. It's happening in the United States and the United Kingdom. Anyway, I know that guy got banned, but like, it's still a viewpoint that needs to be pushed back on. Like, anytime that anyone tries to suggest that we in the West have been like supportive of these groups versus like socialist countries that have not, is just completely revisionist version of history and not accurate in any way. Oh, fuck, that's good. Pushing back against lazy idealist, homophobia, and communist movements is what the current Theory Book Club reading is about. Join the Discord. Not that guy, though. Not that guy. He's not allowed. You're not allowed in the Discord server. Come back 1 year. If you're still watching, come back in 1 year's time. And we'll talk. We'll see if you've made any effort to, educate yourself on any of this stuff. So I guess that was kind of one thing I wanted to talk about. Looking over some of our lazy anti-communism that's in both the right-wing movement and the centrist liberal journalist sect. That's something. There's probably some video content that we can watch. We'll try and have a productive day here. I think this is the last stream of the week. I don't think I will be streaming tomorrow. I guess there's maybe a small possibility I could stream in the evening, but I think this is probably the last stream of the week. That guy still trying to make a point. What do you not understand about 1 year's time? Texas Red or whatever your name is. I don't want to hear from you for 1 year. Okay? If you want to come back February 16th, 2024, we'll talk then. All right? You can't set a 1 year timeout. That's unfortunate. You should be able to do that. We could do it manually. We could just set a calendar alert for next year to lift the ban. What happened to a softer Rob? That was pretty soft. Right? That was pretty soft. That wasn't so bad. I was nice. Let's look at this. Why don't we? Why don't we look at this?
Cuba's electoral authorities announced the approval of the new family codes after Sunday's referendum. In Brazil, a massive event called Rio Embraces Lula was held in support of the former president 1 week ahead of the elections. Ukrainian electoral authorities indicated that the turnout in the referendums to join the Russian Federation exceeded the binding quorum in 3 of the 4 regions. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. On Monday, Cuba's electoral authorities announced the approval of the new Families Code after Sunday's referendum. According to Alina Balseiro, the Secretary General of Cuba's National Electoral Council, 6,251,000 voters went to the polls, with 94% of the ballots accounted as valid votes. Balseiro reported that 66.87% of votes were favorable to the yes option, and 33.13% said no, showing an irreversible trend towards the yes option, and therefore granting approval to the new bill on the Family Code. Balseiro also highlighted Cuban people's discipline during voting day. And during the polling day, Cuban citizens highlighted the importance of the new family code for the well-being of the future generations.
Code for the future above all. This is not a code for us. Today we are only going to have the enormous challenge of approving it and starting the steps of its implementations. This is going to be a code that will be fully enjoyed by the next generations, so that we already see the real transformation in our society that this new code of families will imply. So it will be a code for me and for my family, for the little ones at home, for those children who today are still children and don't vote, because it's the legacy that we are going to leave them. A family code that protects them, that transforms them, and that will
Those are very good
contribute
frames.
significantly to their full development as persons in a free country.
Do you think I could pull off the circular frame look?
Because they are giving us the possibility of being part of the future of this country.
Sound off in the comments.
We are giving the possibility to future generations to live in a Cuba with more rights, with more inclusiveness, and that is very important.
And now let us review the contents and purposes of the new family code.
We got all kinds of sentiments being expressed here.
The people of Cuba will decide whether to adopt a new family code designed.
You've already got choice frames. I would just like to have some more options, really. I'd like to have a couple more options.
The text, composed of 11 titles and 474 articles, establishes solidarity and affection as the pillars on which family relationships are based, and conceives a family as a union of people linked by affective, sentimental.
No, we don't want the adult Harry Potter vibe. No, we don't.
Distinction of gender. The proposal emphasizes special support for women as the caretakers in most families, and provider for the economic value of work in homes, as well as economic protection for those who work as housekeepers and caretakers. 4 types of filiation are contemplated in the code: natural procreation, adoption, assisted reproduction techniques, and bonds resulting from social affectivity, a concept that recognizes and regulates multiparentality both in birth and at later stage. It also mandates the creation of institutions to manage sanctions for domestic violence against vulnerable persons, and extends rights to sexual diversities. Among the main detractors of the initiative are the religious sectors, especially the Conference of Catholic Bishops of Cuba, which consider that the text introduces gender ideology in the legislation and deforms the natural basis of the family. The debate on equal marriage in Cuba was also on the table during the drafting of the 2019 Constitution. At the same time, its approval was not possible due to the intense rejection of the Christian churches, among other social sectors.
No round glasses, no bow ties. I definitely don't think I'm going to be a bow tie guy
anytime.
anytime.
The Nations high-level general debate of the 77th session of its General Assembly. This is the first entirely in-person General Assembly meeting since the start of the pandemic. Heads of state, heads of...
That was all about the... I think that was all about the family law. I think this seems more interesting too. I just think this is an important thing to... It is important to focus on this. Like, we don't need to pretend that there wasn't homophobia present in previous efforts at socialist societies around the world, like in the previous decades. But what we do need to push back on is the idea that we've been some bastion of freedom and progressive values on these issues this entire time, which is a complete distortion of the reality. And like, let's look at the way Cuba has evolved on this, considering someone came in here saying like, oh, Che Guevara was homophobic or whatever. So like, let's take a look then at Cuba and the way that they've completely evolved past that kind of very regressive viewpoint. You know, I think that's really important to focus on.
Código de la Familia, que viene a remover todo lo que son las bases del patriarcado, del costumbrismo, del machismo.
Me siento muy orgullosa, a pesar de los trabajos que pasa uno diariamente combatiendo con con los estereotipos, con la sociedad, construir una familia totalmente diferente a cualquier familia tradicional.
Siempre quise tener hijos. Conocimos a Liuba y a Lice. Se empezó a dar esa cosquillita, ese interés en comenzar a crear algo.
Estamos armando nuestra propia historia de familia. Es inspiración de todo lo que uno quiere hacer y puede hacer.
No somos 4 personas que viven juntas. Somos 2 parejas. Una
And
pareja
fucking
gay,
Engels
una
talked
pareja
about how
lesbiana,
the
que decidieron
nuclear
compartir
family
un
unit was like
proyecto de
a
vida, con lo cual han hecho una familia.
product of a capitalist society as well.
Madres lesbianas que tienen decidido
This
tener su
enforced
nené.
vision of
No
what a family is
encontraba
supposed to
donante,
look like or
no
what
encontraba
gender is
asistencia
supposed to
porque
look like.
evidentemente no la hay, no existe,
This is
es
all a
nulo.
capitalist
Porque
invention
si no eres
as
mujer
well.
heterosexual, no tienes derecho a acudir
Breaking
a
that
las
down is
clínicas
part
de
of
reproducción
socialism.
asistida.
Ya agotamos todas las vías legales, vamos a hacerlo en la casa.
Y encontré el donante. Él accedió porque él tenía el mismo problema que yo, pero los hombres están peor, más marginados.
Yo siento mucho orgullo de ser padre. No necesariamente tengo que ser el padre biológico de una persona para sentirme padre. Alejandro, bueno, es la pareja que me acompaña.
Compartimos todas y cada una de las obligaciones, y no solo con la niña, también con Laura, porque Laura sí es de una relación anterior que Lice tuvo. Por tanto, si ellos dos se integraban al proyecto familiar y no se podía dejar exenta del mismo cariño que iba a recibir la que estaba por venir a Laura. Y eso lo hemos logrado.
Muy pocos niños en el mundo tienen el placer y el privilegio de ser tan amados por tantas personas.
Porque no solo me estás violando mi derecho como ser humano, sino que además estás violando el derecho del niño. Ahí no le puede faltar ninguno de los integrantes de la familia.
Yes, I can, Moss. Son, feedback from 6 million citizens.
Sería el
What?
reconocimiento de que tanto Alejandro como yo legalmente podremos tener voz y voto sobre Ainhoa. Sería la posibilidad de que si el día de mañana yo quisiera volver a salir en estado, hacerlo legalmente y no correr el riesgo que corrimos con Liuba.
En el momento en que Ainhoa iba a nacer, una doctora dijo, hay que proteger a esta niña porque va a tener una repercusión dentro de la sociedad.
Yo creo que los derechos no se refrendan, pero bueno, ya que lo vamos a llevar a referéndum, para mí sería genial que se aprobara. Este código va a ser incluso vanguardista para Latinoamérica. Vienen recogidos todos estos derechos que se nos han negado a las mujeres, y en especial a las mujeres lesbianas. El Código de la Familia en Cuba está desmontando un código anterior, rígido, homófobo. Va a cambiar la mentalidad de este país y la manera de asumir las infancias, las reproducciones, las adolescencias y las responsabilidades parentales.
Cuba once again leading the way. Cuba once again leading the way. And again, it's just, I think it's silly to talk about like regressive viewpoints about like LGBTQ plus issues from decades ago. Again, when there's like a relentless assault going on right now in our own country, in our own society on transgender people. And you have some of the most powerful people in the world, like fucking J.K. Rowling, this massive conservative media machine, billions of dollars being pumped into this conservative media machine by these like oil and fracking billionaires, demonizing
count on me
transgender people every single day.
to talk you through all this.
leading to like stochastic terrorism, this mass, even not even the right-wing media machine, but like the New York Times and the liberal media machine doing the same thing in our own society right now, today in 2023, not in the 50s, but right now. We had the murder of that transgender teen in the UK just over the weekend, horrifying case, which has been, the UK has been ground zero for this like anti-trans hysteria. And immediately after, you have J.K. Rowling, one of the foremost anti-trans activists in the UK, legally forcing someone to publicly apologize to her for correctly claiming that she expresses transphobic views which align with fascism, which is just a factual statement.
Count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Then we have yesterday the hysteria around, there's the letter being written to the New York Times by a number of journalists and readers. How many people wrote this? Because we're talking about this transphobic like panic going on in our culture right now. "900 NYT contributors and 15,000 readers wrote this open letter to the New York Times to just please consider your fixation on promoting these anti-trans views." Of course, there's this massive freak out of people being like, they're attacking. This is like some kind of like Stalinist attack on my freedom of speech and freedom of the press and journalism and stuff. Just this basic letter asking people to like reconsider contributing to these constant attacks. And then you have someone from the NYT being like, actually, we're very empathetic to trans people despite constantly airing or printing these kind of views. And then the next day, in the NYT opinion piece, that's what the focus is. That's what the focus is. This is going on today, right now. Again, not in Cuba in the 50s or 60s, you know? Not in the Soviet Union, but currently right now, today. And like the huge, like all these extremist anti-trans laws being passed right now throughout the United States, banning all gender-affirming care. Well, we just saw what Cuba is doing in this department. You have all these extremely regressive laws being passed in the United States right now, banning all gender-affirming care, making it like just trying to like legally legislate trans people just out of existence. And that's what the liberal media establishment is focusing on. The poor J.K. Rowling, who's being attacked by these trans mobs who are basically no different from, you know, the Taliban and going after, people going after Salman Rushdie with a knife attack. It's basically the exact same thing. These trans people on Twitter calling J.K. Rowling a transphobe or correctly identifying her as a transphobic person. You know, and again, that's not happening in Cuba. Like Cuba is going in that direction, has been leading the world, leading the way in terms of having equitable laws, equitable family laws, and progressive laws regarding these communities. Whereas this is what's happening right now, today, currently in the United States of America. Here in the UK, the poor trans girl that was murdered, she would have been classified as male on her death certificate, according to Keir Starmer's views. Transphobia is bipartisan here. Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of the most transphobic stuff is being printed in the fucking Guardian. And it's not lost on me, and it shouldn't be lost on anyone else as well, either, that Jeremy Corbyn was one of the only, or was the most prominent Labour Party member to speak about the death of this girl and to push back on this like deranged anti-trans hysteria. And there's not a direct one-to-one correlation to this, but he's now out of the Labour Party, according to Keir Starmer. He's not going to be allowed to run for the Labour Party. That's more because of his views on imperialism than it is anything else. But it's a testament to the fact that even the people that are willing to stand up for trans rights in the UK are being, marginalized themselves. Are Canadians able to get sued for calling JK a transphobe on Twitter like those in the UK? I don't know. I think it's possible. I'm not sure. I do try to pay attention to what I'm saying here. I don't want to get sued by JK Rowling or anyone else. But it's just a factual statement to suggest that JK Rowling expresses anti-trans views. She spends every single day of her life fucking doing this. And it's just a factual statement to point out the link between this kind of anti-trans hysteria and what the Nazis believed. And again, in this enforcement of this rigid gender hierarchy. I mean, and promotes people like Matt Walsh, who's he's openly admits to being a fascist. How many more links do you need to have? Oh, and thank you. Sorry, I was in the middle of saying something. So thank you, Librarian, for the gifted sub. Thank you to Librarian, and thank you, Cherokee Chocolate, as well, for the gifted sub. Thank you to you both. I really appreciate it. I mean, pretty much the main viewpoint that J.K. Rowling and all this gender activism that she does, which is supposedly being done in the name of protecting women. But the main viewpoint that she basically tries to express to people is her belief that trans women are dangerous predators and male rapists that are dressing up in disguise in order to attack women in bathrooms and women's shelters and other places. That's her whole point. That's the whole reason that she's engaged in this crusade against trans people in the name of defending women from these kind of dangerous predators. And promoting that viewpoint directly puts trans people in danger. When you add on to this narrative that transgender people are inherently dangerous, which is what she does, it contributes, yes, to violence against transgender people, like we just saw with the murder of that teenager. This is not this great big logical leap, I don't think. It isn't. Yes, you're contributing to this trans panic, and it's getting people killed. It's destroying people's lives. When you contribute to a panic that then leads to laws being passed against giving any person gender-affirming care, let alone teens or kids, it destroys people's lives. It drives trans people to suicide. That's not a conspiracy, or that's not some kind of deranged accusation. That's just a factual statement. I think while we're talking about socialism as well, I think sometimes this is where these kind of reactionary elements, these reactionary seams open up in people that kind of claim to support socialism, but then they refuse to, because they see the way a certain kind of liberal establishment or this sort of NGO complex weaponizes LGBTQ issues, and they think it's alienating to workers who are, of course, all bigoted white men, right? And they think that it's pointless to focus on these struggles. But I think that's another area where we need to understand as well that socialism is actually what the response that there needs to be towards transphobia in society. And I don't think it's that difficult. For some reason, people find it very difficult, but I don't think it's very difficult to have an analysis that understands social justice issues, whether it relates to Black people, Indigenous people, other immigrants and refugees, trans people, other LGBTQ plus people. and recognizes that we need to like protect these groups that are under this kind of assault, and these groups are marginalized, and we do need to defend these groups. But like also like that has to be the answer as well. Like Bernie took a lot of criticism for not focusing on identity issues more, but at the same time, Bernie Sanders was promoting a healthcare policy that would have provided massive protections to an unprecedented protections to transgender people. Or whether you want to focus on, a socialist not supporting social justice or not supporting racial justice. Healthcare is another example where that comes into play as well, considering the different health outcomes that black people have under the capitalist healthcare system as well. So you can simultaneously recognize that these groups are marginalized and they're under attack constantly, and we need to protect and defend these marginalized groups, while also just recognizing that comprehensive, universal programs in healthcare and jobs and other industries are the best way to uplift everybody. I don't think it's really hard to hold these two thoughts in your mind at the same time. For some reason, it becomes very difficult for people. You can only do one or the other. You can only support social justice or trans rights or racial justice or whatever, or socialism. You can't do both at the same time. I mean, I think that's just preposterous. So that's what I mean. Yes, we need to protect trans people, but we also need to offer and understand that a comprehensive state-owned healthcare system is going to provide gender-affirming care to whoever needs it, free of charge. And that's just part of the comprehensive healthcare system that we believe should exist. And I don't think it should be too difficult to support both of these things at the same time. And it's, again, just going back to J.K. Rowling as well, it's just really preposterous, I think. This idea, the whole TERF idea, that the whole reason that, TERFs are against trans rights, it's out of some misguided defense of women. Protecting women in these women-only safe spaces. Considering trans women are doing so much to completely break down that entire gender hierarchy and to destroy the patriarchy, right? What are that's transgender women and people, just by existing, are contributing to completely annihilating this entire patriarchal system that people like J.K. Rowling claim to be against. They're not even radical feminists. They're just bigots. Well, that's the whole point, is that they want to be able to express their bigotry, but doing it with this progressive sheen, so they don't have to feel bad. And people aren't going to be mean to them and call them mean names. Right? Just this like psychological pretzel that they're twisting themselves into to like pretend to still support these progressive issues. And it's actually the trans groups that are the real fascists. It's another way of like looking at the ways that Twitter has melted people's brains, like J.K. Rowling. Because, we're talking about transgender people. It's an extremely marginalized group in our society. It's a minority. It's a very small minority of people, although expanding now that it's becoming more normalized and the idea of gender is becoming more of a gray area. Obviously, it's expanding as our society is becoming slightly less violently hostile to these groups. But still, we're talking about an extreme minority of people. But when you go on Twitter and you say something transphobic and you've got dozens or hundreds of transgender people or other allies yelling at you, it gives you this idea, this like completely nonsense idea that transgender people are some kind of like powerful sect in society, when the exact opposite is true. It's capitalism shining through. To climb the social ladder, you need to kick down. It's not so much climbing as kicking someone else. Well, that's the irony about J.K. Rowling, is that she's like literally throwing her body on the tracks to ensure that the same rigid gender hierarchy that she claims to be against remains in place, and that which she benefits from personally. It should also surprise no one that trans people are more visible online, because it's the safest space to be out. Yeah, no, exactly. It gives people a completely distorted idea about like what level of power this group has in society. And people say, like, well, why do you focus on this issue? Like, why this relentless focus on this, like, small niche issue? It's so alienating to people. But that's the thing. When these marginalized groups are under attack, as transgender people clearly are, this nonstop assault from the political sphere and the media sphere, which, again, gets people killed, destroys people's lives. Yeah, if you're on the left, wherever you are on the left, it's your fucking duty to stand with those communities and to push back against that.
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Thank you, Lennon Smash. Thank you for the 5 gifted subs. I really appreciate that.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Oh, wow. That was like simultaneous. Thank you, Carmine Social Distancing, for the 2 gifted subs as well. 899 gifted subs from Carmine Social Distancing. That's absolutely absurd and ridiculous. Thank you, Diego. Anyway, just like when you're covering this kind of like trans panic, I think this week has been so instructive about the whole thing. Just the sequence of events just of the last week in both the UK and America. You know, the murder of this girl, the way that all these anti-trans activists immediately just doubled right down on all the same rhetoric. And then the powerful media institutions circling the wagons around the people that are perpetrating this panic and suggesting that any attack on them or anyone that correctly identifies with their rhetoric as causing violence and harm to transgender people is some kind of like dangerous assault. It's been very, very instructive over the last couple of days. Anyway, you know, so I guess this part of this overall segment that I'd wanted to talk about is debunking anti-communism, and this got started off by someone coming in here and being like, oh, what would Che Guevara say about transgender people? And it's like, that's why I wanted to draw the link between what Cuba is doing right now today and how they've evolved on that and are leading the world in protecting transgender people and other LGBTQIA people. Whereas in our own society right now today, transgender people are just on under this constant assault. I saw Spain as well. Spain also is it in news and politics? Let me just try and find it. Spain also. There are some places around the world that are actually passing laws to protect these communities. Spain is another place. Spain's parliament passed a historic bill for LGBTQ plus rights following months of debates. The bill will introduce self-ID from the age of 14, ban conversion therapy, ban intersex surgeries on babies, grant lesbian mothers equal parenting rights. This is like the whole focusing on the intersex people as well, I think is really a part of this that probably doesn't get talked about enough, and how in our culture, our society, intersex babies are just basically mutilated at birth. Right? And that's been the accepted practice. That's been the accepted practice for doctors in our society who are, helping deliver babies. So that's a huge step in Spain, banning that practice. But so this is all part of this segment on debunking communism, anti-communism that I had in mind. So I wanted to talk about as well Jordan Peterson. Again, just a dumb man. And the problem again with Jordan Peterson, even that he's dumb, but just totally uncurious. Just totally uncurious about learning anything about this thing that he's built a whole career talking about. And he tried to go after David Harvey. And here Richard Dawkins now, of course, contributing to this in the name of science. You see the way these like former new atheist heroes like Richard Dawkins have now just been like, that's the main primary thing that they're now known for, is like ensuring that, like, just veering into Islamophobia and transphobia as well. And just basically just pivoting to essentially focusing on that in terms of the main issues that they're known for talking about. Where's this exchange with David Harvey, though? This was very entertaining. This guy tweets so much. Fucking get a life, dude. Where's this David Harvey tweet? Like this again, these are right-wing intellectuals talking about Marxism. This is the I would say Dr. Jordan Peterson, the foremost right-wing intellectual in our society. Would we say that's accurate? The foremost intellectual of the conservative movement. Who claims to talk about Marxism. I mean, the whole, as David Harvey points out in this exchange they had here, this whole, he rails against Marxism and his whole, even though I don't really see much good of, I'm not a big fan of Zizek. I don't really find him really interesting or useful in any way, but was useful in terms of doing this debate with Peterson, where he exposed Peterson for not knowing anything about what he was talking about. Zero understanding of what Marxism is, what socialism is, what any of these concepts are. Is we like our society when it comes to socialism is just so profoundly ignorant, and it's not just the right wing. It's not just Jordan Peterson. It's like we see it across the political spectrum, as we're going to see. But just no understanding of these concepts, that they sit around and they make millions of dollars being like prominent critics of it, of Marxism and socialism. Zero understanding of what it actually is. And in David Harvey, that's what he describes David Harvey, a Marxist in academia. 100 million plus corpses not enough for you, buddy? My uncles produced a couple of those corpses during World War II. Hell yeah. Good for them. I mean, that's always the funniest thing when you come to this thing with the 100 million, or sometimes the number changes every time, right? It's like Stalin killed 20 million, then he killed 50 million. Stalin and Mao altogether killed 50 million. Then it's 75 million. Then it's 100 million. Even when you talk about Ukraine and like the whole Holodomor, that number changes all the time, right? As well. You know, it was a couple million, then it was 3 million, then it's 12 million, then it's 20 million. Like it just jumps around all the time. 100 million seems even kind of low, right? You'd think with Peterson and the way that he's immersed in this kind of like completely ignorant anti-communism, you'd think 100 million, that's on the low side. Really, it should be up in the 200 level, the 200 million level. 100 billion corpses not enough for you? You want to keep talking? 10 more million. How about that? But this response from David Harvey is so fucking great. And even David Harvey's not great. Like, David Harvey's like a great author. I think I have a ton of respect for him. But we watched that clip of the David Harvey's book launch when VJ fucking in a very friendly and comradely way just tears into him for not going far enough, you know? But David Harvey's still like a fucking great, in terms of our leftist academics, like one of the absolute best that there is, considering how academia is completely rife with the very same kind of anti-communism that Peterson talks about. Mao ate 100 million bushels of wheat with the giant spoon he borrowed from Stalin. Very, very unfortunate. Sickening behavior. Mao's body count increases every year. He's still got it. Well, that's the amazing thing as well, too, is that this body count of Mao, because of, you know, famines that happened or violence that happened during the Great Leap Forward, while completely ignoring the way that, like, lifespans were drastically extended under both Mao and Stalin. Even under Stalin, you see this drastic increase in people's life expectancy and living standards. That's just factual. That's just a factual observation. And again, even when we're talking about these kind of transitions, these socialist transitions that happened both in the Soviet Union and in China, like you're transitioning from a backwards, illiterate, impoverished, feudalistic society to a economic powerhouse in the Soviet Union. In the span of a few decades, this process took hundreds of years in the West. This transition took hundreds of years. In the Soviet Union, it happened in a couple decades. And yeah, that's a profound process. That's a profound shift. And those big profound shifts in any society are inherently violent. You know, as Engels talked about, a revolution is inherently violent. Like there's no getting away from that. But that transition happening at that level and that speed is still a historic accomplishment in the Soviet Union and in China as well. Transitioning from this, again, a illiterate, impoverished, feudalistic society to now a economic powerhouse, an industrial powerhouse in the span of a few decades. And yeah, that's a violent and destructive process in and of itself. But you see the development. You see the increase in people's literacy, living standards, access to things like healthcare and education, housing, all these things. Still very poor societies, still very poor countries overall. Nowhere near getting to the level where they want to be. But you still see this hugely positive transition, even if it is chaotic and even if there is violence inherent to it. But again, when we talk about this number of 100 million people killed by socialism, none of that progress is ever counted towards that, right? None of the people whose lives who were saved, whose lives were drastically improved and extended. Shutting the bathroom door on my dick in Vietnam and adding myself to the victims of communism. And David Harvey's response is so fucking great. He says, "Dear Jordan Peterson, I invite you to join my free course, Reading Marx's Grundrisse. It would be a great way for you to read Marx for the first time. So when you try to debate someone like Zizek, maybe you won't abjectly humiliate yourself again." Man. Fucking annihilated. Annihilated in the marketplace of ideas. I would love to see a debate between these two, frankly. I would be, even though I'm not a big fan of debates, like, again, it's clear that Peterson has not done the reading. He does not understand. He doesn't understand any of these concepts. He has a basic, like, third-hand understanding of socialism that's apparently been formed through just, like, decades of fucking American action movies, is what I would guess. I don't know. Social murder by capitalist policy is just accepted as the cost of doing business. Well, then you get to, then Peterson was like name searching himself. He was like name searching himself and responding to people, and then someone made fun of him for this exchange. I guess the person I guess the person like went private or something, probably because like Peterson went after them, but was making fun of them for this. Didn't even tag him. Peterson finds the post making fun of his complete ignorance on this subject and says, how can you possibly be so stupid and so blind? And links to the Wikipedia article. This is how this is the foremost academic. Communism is bad. My capitalist overlords told me so. That's right. That's right. And Peterson, the most foremost right-wing academic, literally just links to a Wikipedia article of the Big Black Book of Communism as his answer. And to them, it's just like, it's not even debatable. It's just, that's the end of the discussion. That's the end of the argument. Really a rigorous academic critique. That's right. And like, we can talk about these things and acknowledge that, yeah, violence did happen. Violence did happen in the Soviet Union. Violence did happen in China. There were famines. There was terrible things that happened during events like the Great Leap Forward. Even though it did lead to a lot of progress, it led to a massive increase in literacy and a lot of progress. Of course, there's violence as well. But yes, we also do need to understand the context that this violence was happening under. Number one, understand that this was part of a process that led to the drastic improvement of millions of people's lives. And then also this understanding of socialism requires just a completely ignorant view of the immense violence, the significantly worse violence that has happened under capitalism, under the pursuit of global capitalist hegemony and imperialism and colonialism. This is all part of the same structure. The fucking transatlantic slave trade. Like, we're talking about the Black Book of Communism, and we live in a society that's founded on the mass genocide of indigenous peoples and the transatlantic slave trade. These two things, our culture is built on this. Our culture is built on a fucking graveyard of hundreds of millions of people. And that's just not pulling numbers out of our asses. That's literal factual information. Our whole economic system is founded on this kind of depraved violence and genocide, murder, and theft, and exploitation. All our wealth is built on has been directly stolen from the third world through this mass exploitation process, which has led to, hundreds of millions of deaths, but also just like countless other millions of people being held and living in fucking abject poverty. Killing slave owners, putting that in the Black Book. Or when you talk about Cuba and the Cuban Revolution, they shot people. Oh my goodness, can you believe in the Cuban Revolution they shot people? Yeah, I can believe that. They shot police chiefs and torturers for the fucking brutal, barbaric Batista regime. They shot these cruel landowners that were like executed, that were like living in lives of luxury while people were dying around them, shooting people that were going onto their land, people not having any access to any health care, being able to see a doctor, being able to learn to read. And people were upholding that violent system. And yeah, they ran into trouble in the post-revolutionary period. Yes, they did. Why couldn't it be like the completely peaceful, zero-death American Revolution? That's a good question. Can you search on Google dinosaur that have more than 500 feet? I don't think I am going to do that now. I don't think I am going to do that. After the Boston Tea Party, the American and the British just engaged in respectful debate. Well, and that's the whole thing about the American Revolution as well, that it wasn't even like a fucking real revolution, right? It was like, as Gerald Horne and others have talked about, it was an inherently reactionary movement that wanted to continue to uphold the slave trade and wanted to entrench the power of this like new burgeoning American aristocracy. It wasn't even a real revolution. It wasn't like a movement of it wasn't an anti-colonial movement. And again, to Jordan Peterson, it's just like 100 million dead because of this fucking book. And we can look into the actual Black Book of Communism as well and the origins of it and the fascist links to this book in the first place. We should do that, considering the ways they've pulled these numbers completely out of their asses, the way that they literally count the deaths of fascists and Nazis, as well as the fucking violent reactionaries in Cuba and elsewhere that I was talking about, but also has like distinctly fascist origins as well. But I think it's very important to understand the incredible amount of brutal violence that our own culture is founded on. When we're going to talk about this, that communism killed 100 million people, 100 million corpses. Is that not enough for you, buddy? Like, our culture and our economy and society is founded on significantly more than 100 million corpses. Even when you're just talking about, again, the genocide of indigenous peoples or the transatlantic slave trade, which built our economy and built our society. But we can also talk about just the last 70 years of American-led imperialist foreign policy on top of that. And what Michael Parenti described as a free market Holocaust that took place from, the 50s and is still ongoing today in Guatemala, in Iran, in Vietnam, in Korea, in Chile, in Indonesia, throughout Africa and Latin America. We're talking about tens of millions of people killed in that process as well. In Iraq and Afghanistan, any sanctioned country, exactly. Even when we're not murdering people, we're denying the ability of people to import enough food and medicine. In places like Cuba and Korea, which directly leads to deaths as well. Let me see if I can find it. me see if I can find the... I wanted to make a TikTok about this, actually. See if I can do some kind of cool thing with the... Here we go. Let's do a little reading about this, okay? I'm going to go back to this Jordan Peterson tweet. The David Harvey one. Sorry, let me just find this here. I'm going to go back to this. This tweet from Jordan Peterson, who once again is the foremost academic on the right, which we've established. A Marxist in academia. 100 million plus corpses not enough for you, buddy. Right? He says. Well, let's read about from another Marxist in academia, Michael Parenti, from his book, Black Shirts and Reds, which, of course, if you're in this community, you probably know you should read this book. But if you're a lurker, if you're just tuning in for the first time, if you've never read this book, this is a must read. If you want to have any understanding of this kind of analysis or be able to debunk these kind of like wild claims about our culture, or suggesting that we're somehow peaceful and non-violent and only socialism is violent. This preposterous, childlike notion which people like Jordan Peterson espouse. So this is from the chapter in Black Shirts and Reds. Let us now praise revolution. Chapter 2, the costs of counter-revolution. So this is just talking about foreign policy, American-led imperialist foreign policy in the post-war period. While we're talking about stacking corpses, which is something that Jordan Peterson believes has only ever happened in the Soviet Union or China. The costs of counter-revolution. Let me go back here so you can see. From grade school through grad school, few of us are taught anything about these events except to be told that U.S. forces must intervene in this or that country in order to protect U.S. interests, thwart aggression, and defend our national security. U.S. leaders fashioned other convenient rationales for their interventions abroad. The public was told that the peoples of various countries were in need of our civilizing guidance and desired the blessings of democracy, peace, and prosperity. Any of this sound familiar? Like when you're talking about Ukraine, for example, or Taiwan, two fronts of our current Cold War. Michael Parenti's, writing to us from the tail end of the last one, if it ever even really ended. To accomplish this, of course, it might be necessary to kill off considerable numbers of the more reluctant among them. Such were the measures our policymakers were willing to pursue in order to uplift lesser peoples. The emergence of major communist powers like the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China lent another dimension to U.S. global counter-revolutionary policy.
On me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, John, for the gifted sub. We got some new community members today. It's nice to see some new chatters. Always nice to see some new chatters. The communists were depicted as evil incarnate, demonized conspirators who sought power for power's sake. The United States had to be everywhere to counteract this spreading cancer, we were told. In the name of democracy, U.S. leaders waged a merciless war against revolutionaries in Indochina for the better part of 20 years. They dropped many times more tons of explosives on Vietnam than were used throughout World War II by all combatants combined. Testifying before a congressional committee, former CIA Director William Colby admitted that under his direction, U.S. forces and their South Vietnamese collaborators carried out selective assassination of 24,000 Vietnamese dissidents in what was known as the Phoenix Program. His associate, the South Vietnamese Minister of Information, maintained that 40,000 was a more accurate estimate. U.S. policymakers and their media mouthpieces judged the war a mistake because the Vietnamese proved incapable of being properly instructed by B-52 bomber raids and death squads. By prevailing against this onslaught, the Vietnamese supposedly demonstrated that they were unprepared for our democratic institutions. And here's the important part when we're learning about this subject. And we're talking about this concept of, the Black Book of Communism, 100 million people killed, or whatever people like Jordan Peterson believe about this. Again, the number changes all the time. In pursuit of counter-revolution and in the name of freedom, U.S. forces or U.S.-supported surrogate forces slaughtered 2 million North Koreans in a 3-year war, 3 million Vietnamese, over 500,000 in aerial wars over Laos and Cambodia, over 1,500,000 in Angola, over 1 million in Mozambique, over 500,000 in Afghanistan, and this is in like the early 90s when this was written. There's been significantly more added to this since then. 500,000 to 1 million in Indonesia, 200,000 in East Timor, 100,000 in Nicaragua, combining the Somoza and Reagan eras, over 100,000 in Guatemala, plus an additional 40,000 disappeared, over 700,000 in Iraq, over 60,000 in El Salvador, 30,000 in the dirty war of Argentina, though the government admits to only 9,000, 35,000 in Taiwan when the Kuomintang military arrived from China, 20,000 in Chile, and many thousands in Haiti, Panama, Grenada, Brazil, South Africa, Western Sahara, Zaire, Turkey, and dozens of other countries in what amounts to a free market world holocaust. And again, this is in the early 90s that Parenti wrote this. Since that time, you had the whole 20-year war on terror to add on to that. The 20-year war on terror and all the resulting horror that was inflicted in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Syria. Not only the millions killed in that process, but also 32 million refugees displaced, a massive historic refugee crisis created from these wars and destabilization efforts, wars in Iraq and Afghanistan with the U.S. military, and proxy wars in Libya and Syria, arming and funding, again, just as we're doing in Ukraine currently, arming and funding these extremist proxies to fight against and destabilize regimes that we want to overthrow. So this is like Michael Parenti's analysis here just is not even, doesn't even go far enough because of, you know, when it was written historically. Like we've added mountains of corpses to this tally since that time. And for some reason this is accepted as being just a normal part of, you know, our creating our global economy. And we don't talk about the horror. We don't have days of remembrance for the victims of imperialism or colonialism or capitalism. We don't have monuments and statues to these victims being erected in, like the one that's being erected in Ottawa, for example. We don't have this preposterous notion that our entire economic system, and this is, ironically, this should be true. The violence that's been inherent to erecting our economic system and our culture should discredit it as an economic model, but it doesn't. It's accepted as just being normal. Whereas the violence that happened, even though it's grotesquely exaggerated, the violence that did happen in these revolutionary societies is used as this constant example of why attempting to implement this kind of ideology is just not possible, or inherently evil, or inherently violent. Whereas the violence that's inherent to our own society, our own economy, is completely normalized and, in fact, encouraged. It's also worth mentioning that other countries usually make some efforts to confront and overcome their past. When has the U.S. ever faced accountability for any of this shit? Or you have, like in Canada, Sean, the whole TRRS and the whole walking the path of reconciliation and this complete bullshit line that we feed ourselves about overcoming this history and learning from it on the mistakes, right? The famous mistakes of our past that we want to overcome. Just this completely nonsense process, which is just designed to continue to whitewash the fact that we're continuing to implement this genocidal system against the will of people. We're continuing this genocide today, but we're trying to make this cursory effort to acknowledge the violence of the past as a way to like make that okay, that we're continuing to perpetuate it. Yeah, now we do a land acknowledgement before Oilers games. That's right. That's also just regarding military, covert, indirect proxies, no sanctions, no nod to any other form of global demoralization that Washington has implemented. Yeah, no, it's barely scratching the surface. Like, that's the point, right? You know, it's not just these like imperialist proxy wars that have taken place, but it's also, the sanctions regime and like forcing countries around the world to adapt our preferred economic model at gunpoint. Like, which has led to, you know, these countries perpetuating this exact same system of exploitation. Just think of the environmental damage the U.S. does too. Vietnam had entire ecosystems destroyed. Yeah, or Cambodia as well, or like all of Southeast Asia. Literally poisoning people for generations with Agent Orange and these other, and chemical warfare. Literally chemical warfare still causing birth defects to this day in Vietnam. And this is where I also push back on this idea that, you know, the Soviet Union or other socialist governments contributing to these struggles, contributing to these anti-imperialist struggles was just another form of imperialism. That's just not true. It's not. You know, supporting the North Vietnamese, supporting the North Koreans, supporting Angola, supporting these anti-colonial struggles were being done in the name of destroying imperialism, destroying the major imperialist powers, and taking away the power of these immensely entrenched Western colonialist and capitalist interests, and redistributing that to everybody, and literally making everyone's lives better, both in these places that were being exploited and in the empire. You know, so, but yeah, this kind of analysis is barely even scratching the surface of the violence that we've committed to uphold these kinds of structures. And Jordan Peterson, again, the foremost intellectual on the right, completely either ignorant of this process or just like, supports it. I don't know which is better. He's either completely ignorant of this violence or he supports it because he personally benefits from it. The USSR was a bulwark for anti-colonial struggles no matter the shortcomings. And that's people on the left even get this distorted idea that, they're just doing more like the Soviet Union going into Africa and supporting these anti-colonial struggles. The Soviet Union going in Southeast Asia or Latin America. They just want to occupy these places. They just want to do their own colonialism. It's just nonsense. It's just nonsense, and it obscures and obfuscates who wields the actual imperialist violence. And like, if we want to be anti-imperialist and you want to take power away from the imperialist countries, that's a war. That's a war. I mean, on this subject, and again, it's not just right-wing media personalities, right? It's people like this, Evan Dyer from the CBC. I don't know what this guy's deal is. Let's look into it. Evan Dyer, senior reporter with CBC. Like, these are the people that make up the centrist liberal journalistic class, right? These are not right-wing ideologues. In fact, these people would probably suggest that they don't have an ideology. They're just journalists. They're just liberal journalists that just call it like they see it, right? It's been a journalist with CBC for 25 years. Look at this tweet. It's amazing. Today, Mexican President AMLO is giving Mexico's highest honor, the Orden del Aguila Azteca, to Cuba's dictator, Miguel Diaz-Canel, an award once given to Nelson Mandela and Rigoberta Menchú, a sad event that says a lot about AMLO and where he's trying to take Mexico. So this 25-year career journalist with the CBC, Canadian state media, which people like Jordan Peterson think is like socialist. They think that the Canadian government is socialist and CBC is like a socialist propaganda outlet. Suggesting that it's Okay, so AMLO giving an award to President Diaz-Canel of Cuba, suggesting that it's offensive because it was once given to Nelson Mandela. Well, you know what clip I'm going to look at next. Evan, come on. Evan Dyer's another Journo Nepo baby. What do you know? What do you know? What a surprise. The Dyer family. Son of Gwen Dyer, who began writing articles in the early 70s. Yet another one of our completely nepotistic, non-meritocratic, supposedly non-ideological journalistic class in this country. But what did Mandela say about this very thing? This guy's saying, how dare AMLO give a award to the president of Cuba? How dare you? This award was once given to Nelson Mandela. Well, let's hear from fucking Nelson Mandela himself.
Let us move on to our next questioner at the microphone over there. Mr. Edelman.
Welcome to America, Mr. Mandela. I'm Ken Edelman. Those of us who share your struggle for human rights and against apartheid have been somewhat disappointed by the models of human rights that you have held up since being released in jail. You've met over the last 6 months 3 times with Yasser Arafat, who you have praised. You have told Gaddafi that you share the view on, and applaud him on his record of human rights and his drive for freedom and peace around the world. And you have praised Fidel Castro as a leader of human rights.
Fidel Castro.
Said that Cuba was one of the countries that's head and shoulders above all other countries in human rights.
Objectively true.
Despite the fact that documents at the United Nations and elsewhere show that Cuba is one of the worst.
Objectively true that they're a global leader in human rights then and now.
Of leaders of human rights? And if so, would you want a Gaddafi or an Arafat or a Castro to be a future president of South Africa?
One of the mistakes which some political analysts make is to think that their enemies should be our enemies.
Just in one sentence, just annihilated the entire argument. Fucking legendary. Absolutely legendary. This guy's, how can AMLO be praising Cuba? Don't you know they once gave the same awards of Nelson Mandela? These are our career journalists. This is our 25-year CBC reporter. This is the journalistic establishment in this country. How deeply, deeply brainwashed by anti-communist ignorance they are. And a complete lack of understanding of any kind of this history. These are the people that control our media and the narratives that happen in our media.
That we can and we will never do. We have our own struggle, which we are conducting. We are grateful to the world for supporting our struggle.
Once it became impossible to not support it.
We are an independent organization with its own policy. And the attitude of every country towards, our attitude towards any country is determined by the attitude of that country to our struggle. Yasser Arafat, Colonel Gaddafi, Fidel Castro support our struggle to the hilt. There is no reason whatsoever why we should have any hesitation about hailing their commitment to human rights as they are being demanded in South Africa. Our attitude is based solely on the fact that they fully support the anti-apartheid struggle. They do not support it only in rhetoric. They are placing resources at our disposal for us to win the struggle. That is the position.
Amazing.
Let us
fucking amazing. So I wanted to look at this exchange that I got in with this guy.
let's move on to
That's why I wanted to make sure to watch this clip. So this guy says, I guess they don't teach history in journalism school. Posts like this make me agree with conservatives that we need to defund the CBC, showing this picture of Castro and Mandela hugging. This is actually, I studied history. This is Evan. This is our Canadian media establishment. Actually, I studied history. That is one reason why I know that while both these men were presidents, one allowed free elections and the other didn't. One imposed a command economy and the other didn't. One imprisoned dissidents and the other didn't. These two are not the same, even though just completely denying the fact that Mandela himself loved and supported Castro and supported Cuba and the Cuban people. Also worth pointing out as well, when you talk about South Africa under Mandela and the way that Mandela was constrained by the IMF. That's a really important detail when you understand the role that the IMF plays. We talked about this with Amanda last week. The role that the IMF plays in upholding imperialism. And Mandela, after becoming president, wanted to go way further, wanted to enact land reform and go after the powerful landholders and capitalists in South Africa that were upholding apartheid and were constrained by specifically the IMF because the apartheid government had taken all these IMF loans, and the IMF, when Mandela took over, said, you're still on the hook for all these billions of dollars of loans. And that's how the imperialists were able to keep them from going anywhere near how far they wanted to go in their social reforms and land reforms after they took over. So when we talk about the command economy or whatever, the economy, the IMF, that's what the IMF does, is it uses this kind of like debt trap diplomacy, which is ironically what we now accuse China of doing, or what we sometimes accuse the Soviet Union of doing in the past. Use this kind of debt trap diplomacy to ensure that they couldn't go far enough and they would maintain an economy that was preferable to Western capital penetration. Also a very important point to remember. So this guy says he studied history, but I don't think he did, because he seems very ignorant of it. He's responding to everyone too. He's responding to everyone and just displaying his ignorance to everybody. Again, this is, just to keep reiterating this is our media establishment in Canada. Don't you think that long-standing and brutal U.S. sanctions on Cuba should be part of your analysis? Like, people are being pretty fucking generous with this guy. And he says, no, the U.S. embargo accounts for a very small fraction of the economic hardship of Cubans, and which is just like, no source for that. That's just a fucking outrageous statement with completely no evidence whatsoever to back it up. And none of the everyday oppression, enforced conformity, or persecution of those who think differently. It is not the U.S. that prevents multi-party elections, but the Cuban Communist Party. Once again, this completely chauvinist idea that the only possible way to have a democracy is with a specific Western-style liberal democracy that we have, which, as we've talked about many times, is not in any way democratic, right? It's this way for people like Evan to feel good about the fact that we live in this supposed democracy, despite the fact that we do not live in a democracy. We live, in fact, under a bourgeois dictatorship, where we have the opportunity of selecting from multiple different capitalist parties that represent different sort of ideological wings of the capitalist class. And we literally elect majority governments with like a small percentage of the voting population of this country actually voting for the party that wins. And by the way, we currently have a leader of this country, almost been there a decade, literally another nepotism case, a political dynasty with no term limits. This is the kind of thing that we accuse other countries of being authoritarian dictatorships when they have these kinds of situations. This is what happens today in Canada. Not a democracy. But of course, people like Evan fetishize this idea of the Western liberal democracy as the only possible democratic way of organizing an economy. And while Cuba, while under the brutal sanctions and embargoes, and has been kept in fucking abject poverty for decades because of its inability to trade with the U.S. and the embargo that the U.S. enforces on other countries, has still managed to cobble together a system where people have access to really quality healthcare, even though they're lacking lots of resources. It's nowhere near as good as it should be because of the embargo that this guy is just hand waving away as being a factor in their economy. But still are able to provide world-class education and healthcare to everybody, and housing as well. And in Cuba, you might live in a shack. There's many people that do. Again, it's still a very poor country and has been kept that way by design, but no one is homeless, which we can't say the same for Canada. We've got massive homeless, unhoused communities cropping up in all our major cities. People living and dying on the street every day in our wonderful capitalist, free democracy that Evan fetishizes. Not to mention the best doctors in the world that they send abroad to fellow overexploited countries. No, but that's just Cuban imperialism doing that. When they teach literacy to people, when they teach people to read and ensure they have widespread literacy in their country, that's just so they can read the communist propaganda. That's what we're told. This guy shits on Cuba, but in 10 years, Canadians will be going to Cuba for medical tourism. Completely unironically true. On the embargo, the original intent was to, quote, bring about hunger, desperation, and the overthrow of the Castro government. But yeah, the embargo actually has no impact. So I had an exchange with this guy too. Our friend Nick, Cuba's far more democratic than Canada. Oh, there's our friend Metal Dipshit. Look at that. Posting the Mandela speech right there in the replies. I didn't even see that. Congratulations. Good job, Metal Dipshit. Where am I? So I responded to something. I don't think I had a main comment to this guy, but I responded to something that he said. He says here, funny you mentioned Mandela when he was grateful to Castro and the Cuban people for supporting his struggle against apartheid. Evan says, Mandela also sincerely thanked the Soviet Union and East Germany for their support. It doesn't make the Stasi or KGB good. For a better understanding of his attitude toward these regimes, read his 2002 acceptance speech of the Lenin Prize. I said, hey, Evan, did you ever consider that the Soviet and Cuban support for Mandela at the height of his struggle indicates that they were, in fact, good? And he says, no. The gulags, repression, and murders outweigh any such assistance. Sweden secretly gave $400 million to the anti-apartheid struggle. I'll stick with Sweden. Of course, no history of violence or colonialism on the part of Sweden either, right? Of course. But again, we just went over, Evan. You're not a journalist. You know this. No, this is your brain on liberalism and no reading and no theory. But again, we just went over the long history of, indeed, repression and murder that our entire fucking culture is built on. And gulags, suggesting gulags is some inherent evil to the socialist system when, again, we have prisons in our own society. We've got indigenous people still dying in our prisons to this day, overrepresented in Canadian prisons to this day. America has the most sprawling and vast and barbaric prison system in the world today. That makes the gulag system look like a fucking vacation. But of course, for people like Evan, these things are just things that are just inherent to socialism and things that we can never ever praise, never ever talk about the positive things that happen in these societies. I haven't looked at his reply here, but I said we actually have prisons in the West as well, and racked up a body count in the tens of millions over the last few decades, enforcing our system at gunpoint over the rest of the world. And this guy says, and yet despite your open opposition to the Western democratic capitalist system, you're somehow not in prison. See the difference? And no, I don't. No, I do not. And this guy has a great response as well. He's not in prison because in our democratic system, the powers that be know that a random dude has no power or influence due to the whole system being controlled by corporate elites and their delegates in the neoliberal political parties that have a monopoly on power. That's the point that I've been making on this stream over the last couple of weeks, right? About our supposed free speech that, again, people like Evan fetishize and hold up as an example of the superiority of our system. Our freedom of speech is meaningless when we don't have power to change things, which we don't. Our freedom of speech is completely meaningless. And considering the ways that people, when they start using their speech to actually threaten power, they do go to jail. Right? There's plenty of people, we have many political prisoners in this society. When you do actually threaten power, that's when you are targeted with extrajudicial assassination or are subject to state violence. But again, our freedom of speech is meaningless because we don't have, our speech means nothing because we can't actually use our speech to change things. We can have nice little protests. We can hold up signs. We can chant slogans. We can write letters. But none of this precious free speech actually can challenge power in our culture or society in any way. And in fact, we have a powerful media arm which is designed to ensure people that don't express these opinions in the first place. I'm not in prison, certainly. I'm not in prison. I'm able to log on here to twitch.tv and talk about these subjects. Yet, I also have a platform on social media anyway, significantly larger than career journalist Evan Dyer. Well, why am I not invited onto the CBC to talk about anti-imperialism? Why am I not invited to be a CBC commentator to express these ideas? Because these ideas aren't expressed on the CBC. These ideas are not expressed in our free media establishment, in our wonderful free speech society. I did a TikTok to this effect a few days ago because this obviously comes up a lot. This is what I say when people fetishize this idea of free speech and suggest that our society is so much more evolved and advanced because of this wonderful idea of free speech. Voting, going to city council meetings, signing petitions. It might be able to make a few small little tiny tweaks around the edges, right? And that's not nothing. Can you, using these methods, make actually drastic systemic change? No. To the police, to the way that we consume fossil fuels, to our immigration policy. And if the answer to that question is no, and I think we all know what the answer is, right? If the answer to that question is no, you can't use these methods to make these kinds of changes, well then, do we actually live in a democracy? Do we have any right to be criticizing or accusing other countries of being authoritarian? Evan, what good is free speech? What good is the right to freedom of assembly and the freedom to participate in the democratic process? What good are any of these rights if it doesn't actually lead to any of the big systemic changes that we know are necessary? What good is it? That's my question to Evan. I don't think Evan has a good answer on that. But again, this is our media establishment in this country. Who's the fascist troll in chat? We've had a couple of those today. We've had a couple of these today. Evan, a photojournalist, literally just sued the RCMP yesterday because our fascist police state doesn't allow freedom of the press. Like Lana's pointing out, you just had that arrest in Ohio, the person trying to report on the death cloud. Or the death of Black Lives Matter organizers from the George Floyd protests, being found mysteriously dead in burned out cars with zero explanation. Or to go back to the long-standing trend of like assassination and arrest and harassment of these civil rights leaders. You think you have it bad? At least your intelligence agencies don't murder your own heads of state like they did in communist China on November 22nd, 1963. That's right. Very shame. Dealey Plaza in Taiwan, the site of a horrible assassination of an elected official. Luckily for me, I don't have this problem because I don't actually believe in free speech. And again, we go back to Parenti.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
What's the part that I want to find? There's a specific part that I want to find. The part about the radio programs. Yeah, here. And thank you so much, Comrade Social Distancing, for the amazing 900th gift sub. Diego, thank you. I love you. I literally would not be able to do this show without your support. Like, that's just a factual statement. Yeah, the fascists want to suppress my free speech. Okay, likewise. Yeah, I don't believe in free speech either.
You could look at any existing socialist country. If you don't want to call them socialist, call them whatever you want. Post-capitalist, whatever. I don't care. Call them camels, window shades. Doesn't matter. As long as we know the countries we're talking about. You can look at any one of those countries, and you can evaluate them in several ways. One, comparing them to what they had before. And that, to me, is what's very compelling. That's what's so compelling about Cuba, for instance. When I was in Cuba, I was up in the
Evan, I hope you're watching this.
Which is like the
Maybe I'll send this clip to Evan
very
later.
Rugged mountains, the people, very poor they were. And I said to this campesino, I said, do you like Fidel? And he said, sí, with all our souls. I remember his gesture, with all our souls. I said, why? And he pointed to this clinic right up there on the hill, which we had visited. He said, look at that. He said, before the revolution, we never saw a doctor. If someone was seriously ill, it would take 20 people to carry that person, because you'd go day and night. It would take 2 days to get to the hospital. First, because it was far away, and second, because you couldn't go straight. You couldn't cross the latifundio lands. The boss would kill you. So you had to go like this.
These are the kind
and
of people that
when we got to the hospital, the
had
person
consequences
might be
after
dead
the revolution.
by the time we got there. Now we have this clinic up here with a full-time doctor. And today, a doctor in Cuba, when you become a doctor, you've got to spend 2 years out in the country. That's your dedication to the people. And a dentist who comes 1 day a week. And for more serious things, we're not more than 20 minutes away from a larger hospital. That's in the Escambray. So that's freedom. We're freer today. We have more life. And
but there's only one party, though.
Who says to me,
there's only one party. So how is that possible? How is that more free? How is that more democratic? This is the baby brain Western liberal democracy, ignorant anti-communism that our entire media establishment, our entire political establishment are all in complete agreement on.
Before, all I used to see here in Havana, you call this drab and dull. We see it as a cleaner city. It's true, you got the paint is peeling off the walls, but you don't see kids begging in the streets anymore, and you don't see prostitutes. All we used to have was prostitutes. Prostitution used to be one of the biggest industries. And today, this man is going to night school. He said, I can read. I can read. Do you know what it means to be able to read? Do you know what it means to be able not to read? I remember when I gave my book to my father, I dedicated a book of mine, Power and the Powerless, to my father. I said, to my father with my love. Gave him a copy of the book. He opened it up, looked at that. He'd only gone to the 7th grade. He was a son of an immigrant, a working class Italian. And he opens the book and he starts looking through it. And he gets misty-eyed, very misty-eyed. And I thought it was because he was so touched that his son had dedicated a book to him. That wasn't the reason. He looks up to me and says, I can't read this, kid. I said, that's okay, Dad, neither can the students. I mean, that's not something, I mean, don't worry about that. I wrote it for you. I mean, it's your book, and you don't have to read it. You know, it's a very complicated book, an academic book. He says, yeah, I can't read this book. And the defeat that man felt. That's what illiteracy is about. That's what the joy of literacy programs is. That's why in Nicaragua you got people walking proud now for the first time. They were animals before. They weren't allowed to read. They weren't taught to read. So,
and again, literacy has been such a central tenet of these socialist projects, whether it's in Cuba, Nicaragua, in China, of course. Again, in the Great Leap Forward, whatever problems or contradictions that existed with that huge increase in literacy amongst people in China. So which was it democratic before? Is it oppressive? You know, this is drastically improving people's lives, millions of people's lives. People kept in ignorance so they can be more easily exploited by these Western powers. Also, I can't help but think of all the Western leftists who will argue that literacy is not necessary. Not only not necessary, but like inherently bad because it propagandizes people with statist ideology. Oh God! Actually, literacy programs are ableist. Oh no! Oh goodness! But the next part is what I want to focus on.
So you compare a country to what it came from, with all its imperfections, and those who demand instant perfection.
This is people like Evan.
The day after the revolution, they get up and say, "Are there civil liberties for the fascists? Are they going to be allowed to have their newspapers and their radio program? Are they going to be able to keep all their farms?" The passion that some of our liberals feel, the day after the revolution, the passion and concern they feel for the fascists, the civil rights and civil liberties of those fascists who were dumping and destroying and murdering people before. Now the revolution has got to be perfect. It's got to be flawless. Well, that isn't my criteria. My criteria is what happens to those people who couldn't read. What happens to those babies that couldn't eat, that died of hunger? And that's why I support revolution. The revolution that feeds the children gets my support. Not blindly, not unqualifiedly. And the Reaganite government that tries to stop that kind of process, that tries to keep those people in poverty and illiteracy and hunger, that gets my undiluted animosity and opposition.
So again, that's been the guiding principle. When we talk about this like authoritarianism or freedom of speech, that's been my guiding principle on this. And people like Evan, that's what when you hear this speech, that's all you hear when they say this kind of thing. They're not able to express their viewpoint. Oh no, these people are oppressed. Are they going to be able to keep their radio programs, their newspapers? We're seeing this in Nicaragua, like right now to this day. We're seeing that right now with Ortega in Nicaragua, and Ortega is framed as being some kind of authoritarian dictator because he throws out Western-sponsored journalistic institutions and doesn't allow them, and says like, no, we're gonna these like foreign-sponsored Western imperialist journalistic institutions. No, we're not going to allow that in our country because you're deliberately trying to destabilize our program and our movement. So no, we're not going to allow it. And then people like Evan climb out of the woodwork. They climb out of the woodwork and say, are they going to be able to keep their radio programs? You know, that's why Reading Parenti is so relevant, because these arguments are still happening now. You know, what was this, 30 years ago? 30 years ago, exact same arguments still happening now. And the Evans of the world, the people that Parenti is railing against in this speech, they're the ones that are controlling, that are infesting our media establishments, our academic establishments, our political establishments, our entertainment establishments. And then we fucking delude ourselves into thinking that we live in a society that has free speech. This is the kind of like ignorant anti-communism that our society is built around. And again, people, whether it's people in the media establishment of Canada, like Evan, or whether it's prominent right-wing intellectuals like Justin Peterson or Jordan Peterson, or even left-wing intellectuals a lot of the time, all lean on these very lazy and very easily debunked tropes about violence and democracy and freedom of the press and free speech and all this shit. Justin Bieberson. The Parenti video isn't actually discolored. This is just what it looked like when you were allowed to smoke indoors. That's right. We were just yellow in the late 80s. Anyway, on that note, folks, I think that's pretty much the whole segment that I wanted to do on this. I'd like to transition into talking about some more Ukraine stuff. Obviously, it's still very linked. I'd like to just take a little break in a couple of minutes. Before I do take a break, though, I would just like to encourage people, if you're tuning in for the first time or if you're a regular community member, to please, in order to, because I don't get offered an outlet in like
count on me.
Canadian media, despite having a big platform. Like I said, I have a much significantly larger platform online than Evan Peters from Life, like 25-year CBC journalist, but I don't get invites from the CBC to opine on these issues.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Even though we supposedly have freedom of speech and freedom of the press. You'd think in our meritocratic society, perhaps the platform that I've built up would enable me to have a voice in our media establishment, but I don't because of the views that I talk about. The only way that I'm able to espouse these views and make a small living from it is by doing it right here on twitch.tv. So if you support the community, if you want to support this content and make sure that it continues to remain on the air on twitch.tv
to talk you through all this,
please subscribe to the channel for $5 per month or absolutely free of charge.
Have good old Rob to talk you through all this,
or absolutely free of charge if you are an Amazon Prime subscriber.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
You can also gift subscriptions. And I'm going to make sure to thank everyone in just a moment.
You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
I'm going to thank everyone that's contributing.
To Rib.
Thank you, 10,000 Sandwich, for the 27 months of Tier 2. Thank you. And I'm going to make sure I thank everyone else. But yes, subscribe, gift subscriptions, donate, friend coin, and join the base level of Twitch's only two-dimensional triangle-shaped friendship access and trickle-down clout tiered reward system. It's very, very helpful. It helps support the work that I do. It helps keep this commentary on Twitch. And it's just a wonderful community that you should be a part of, frankly. Not to toot my own horn here, but I think it's a fucking fantastic community. So many of us are using this fucking site because there's no place for us anywhere else where we could actually make a living. Like Lana, you're someone that Lana should have a column in the Globe and Mail. Lana, or aka the Freak Museum, in this chat has better analysis and understanding of politics and geopolitical affairs than literally every single person that writes is paid to write about these issues in our society. You know, I love going here on Twitch and doing the show. I love it. I really do. I really do. What I would love even more, though, is to be able to express these views and also have like a salary, like a regular salary and, you know, benefits and insurance and vacation and sick days and stuff like that. That's what I would love even more. I absolutely love doing this show and logging on here every single day and talking about these issues, but it's very difficult not having an actual salary. And I know I have the ability to talk about these things, and I know that like I have a platform to talk about these things, but because in our free speech society, we don't actually allow people to express these viewpoints, I'm not able to actually have a career doing that without logging on here every single day and trying to make the little number at the bottom of the screen go up. Yeah, you need to be a scion of a connected family like Evan Dyer, and you need to just like bend over backwards to ensure you uphold the status quo of this country rather than challenging it in any way. Or you can challenge it from the right. You can still, of course, you can challenge the status quo from the right or the extreme right and still get a platform in this country. You can get invited. You can be a fucking deranged,
to mark up the size
fascist
of the account.
sympathizing, Islamophobic con artist and still get invited to write op-eds in our mainstream papers. Of course, from the right, but never from the left. A quick couple of thank yous. Bark Eater, thank you for the 100 friend coin. Thank you, Hot Meal, for the 11 months, tier 1, almost 1 entire year from Hot Meal. Thank you, Hot Meal. Thank you, Lexi, for the gifted sub and the 6 months resub at tier 1. Thank you very much, Lexi. I really appreciate that. Thank you to DRP for the gifted sub. Thank you, DJ Chimp, for the gifted sub. I think that's everybody.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
And thank you, Sean, for the gifted sub as well. I really appreciate that, Sean. The capitalists begrudgingly accept people fighting for even more capitalism. Well, that's exactly right, because even though people from the right challenge the status quo, they don't actually challenge the economic status quo in any way. Even though they like to rail against elites. You know, that's the kind of false, that's what, as Parenti describes in Black Shirts and Reds, which again, I encourage every single person watching this to read. Very important to read that. That's what fascism, that's a central part of fascism, a false revolution. Making people think that it's a movement that is upending the status quo or the establishment in any country, rather than entrenching it even further. And when I talk about this stuff, and we're very close to getting to a level 3 of this hype trade, folks, very close. Probably one other gifted sub would do it. Probably. I'm just saying. But again, when I talk about this shit about like complaining about not getting a sort of opportunity to participate in our sort of marketplace of ideas, you know, I'm not trying to brag when I talk about the platform that I have. I'm not trying to like suggest that I'm fucking great. Like there's dozens or hundreds of people that are doing great analysis. I'm just using it as an example, like even from the metrics that these people use to determine who gets a space in this discourse. Like, I do have the ability to make arguments to people that would reach wide audiences, that would be controversial, like these people, what these people seem to like. But, you know, this offer is not extended to me. But it's extended to the status quo upholding nepotism babies like Evan Peters.
We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account.
TRRS Rob Mode 2 TRRS Rob Knife.
Thank you, Matt, for the 200 friend coin. I really appreciate that. Thanks. Let me just take a short break, okay? I'm going to take a short break. I got to go to the bathroom. I'll come back. We'll talk about more Ukraine stuff and more geopolitics and imperialism and all this good stuff. Imagine watching the color-corrected lecture. Ugh. You're my Canadian Hassan. Well, thank you, Vice Serica. You know what? I really like Hassan. Hassan helped get me to where I am, so I'll always appreciate him on that level. I do try. This is a comradely criticism. I do try to, especially when it comes to these foreign policy issues, take my analysis maybe a little bit further. A little tiny bit further.
We're communists. Power and
I'm just going to let this play for a few minutes. I'm going to take a break. I'll come back.
Wonderful, good, happy life that you so like. As George Bush's wife said, we are millionaires, or we are not ashamed of it. We enjoy our wealth. And I thought, at last they say it. Finally they say it. Instead of the usual thing is, you know, how we rich suffer and we're misjudged and it's just terrible being rich. Can't hear. Okay, I wondered who that man was creeping up like that.
Okay, I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere, folks. I'll be back with more conversation and analysis right after this.
That seems to be out of range, actually. This microphone has a mind of its own. All right. Now, that nature of expansion really affects the nature of, it's an important imperative because it means capitalism also can never stay home. It goes abroad. If you ever saw the film Controlling Interest, there's a corporate president who says, those corporations that stayed regional in New England years ago and decided not to go national, we can't even remember their names. They died. We had to go national. And those of us who are now national know we have to go international. We have to invest abroad. So one of the laws of capitalist motion and development is this inexorable expansion. And that means expansion into an expropriation of the third world. A process that's been going on for about 400 years, perpetrated by the Portuguese, the Spaniards, the Dutch, the Belgians, the French, the English, and most recently, most successfully, most impressively, by the Americans. That is by the ruling classes of these countries, not by the ordinary people. The ordinary people simply paid the costs of empire. The ordinary people simply sent their sons off to die on the plains of India or in the jungles of the Congo or in Latin America, wherever else. But that expropriation of the third world has been going on for 400 years, brings us to another revelation, namely that the third world is not poor. You don't go to poor countries to make money. There are very few poor countries in this world. Most countries are rich. The Philippines are rich. Brazil is rich. Mexico is rich. Chile is rich. Only the people are poor. But there's billions to be made there, to be carved out and to be taken. There's been billions for 400 years. The capitalist European and North American powers have carved out and taken the timber, the flax, the hemp, the cocoa, the rum, the tin, the copper, the iron, the rubber, the bauxite, the slaves, and the cheap labor. They have taken out of these countries. These countries are not underdeveloped, they're overexploited. One of the countries that had a great deal of Western capital in it was Tsarist Russia. Mostly English, French, some German, some American, including one Herbert Hoover, who with Leslie Urquhart, famous British millionaire, owned the Russo-Asiatic Corporation, which, if the Russian Revolution hadn't happened, Herbert Hoover would have been one of the richest men in the world. And years later, when he was President of the United States, in 1931, when 1/3 of this country was unemployed, when people didn't have enough to eat, when people were driven to the edge of desperation, President Herbert Hoover said to the San Francisco Examiner, he said, "My greatest ambition in life is to see the overthrow of Bolshevism in Russia." There came, with the Russian Revolution, a break in the fabric of international capitalist history. There now was a country where the unwashed, where the workers of Petrograd and Moscow were actually taking over, where they were actually taking over the land, the labor, the technology, and the resources of their country, where communists were coming in to power. And there's a remarkable correspondence between Secretary of State Lansing and President Woodrow Wilson, in which Lansing says, The Bolsheviks are wanting in political virtue. They would preach to the ordinary man that he might elevate himself through political means rather than by dint of hard work. This would be a most unfortunate example to the common man in our country and other countries. They understood what was the threat. The Americans themselves, the American ruling class, had very little cap, didn't have all that much. I told you about Hoover and a few other speculators, other people like that. But they joined in with 14 other nations to invade the Soviet Union, to overthrow the socialist government that had just been put in after the Tsar was overthrown. That process of invading a revolutionary country is still happening before our eyes. If you want to understand those years after the Russian Revolution, just look at what's going on in Nicaragua. Invasion, either by directly with troops from your own country, or by using surrogate troops, and they use the white armies and the white generals, the white guard armies. Embargoes, isolation, withholding food supplies, sabotage, encirclement, refusing diplomatic recognition. These are the methods that are used, and these are the methods, time-honored methods, that are being used right now by Reagan against another revolutionary government, which is Nicaragua. That process, this water has ice cubes in it that float right down your throat. That process of encirclement and destabilization continued right until World War II. On the eve of World War II, Foreign Minister of the Soviet Union named Litinov went to, did I pronounce the name correctly? No, I can't say it that way.
This is really relevant. Talking about the origins of World War II and the encirclement of the Soviet Union is so relevant right now that we're in the run-up to World War III, as we've been discussing, and the encirclement of China. And it's literally the exact same conditions where we encircle them and destabilize them and use every imperialist trick to try and ensure their form of social progress can't continue. And then we accuse them of being aggressive and hostile while we're threatening and subverting them every step of the way. Exact same process currently going on right now.
Went to the Western powers and called for an alliance with England, the United States, and France against Nazi Germany. And that if the Germans attacked Czechoslovakia, they would all join in or attack Poland or attack anybody.
And remember, what do we always hear about? The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Those devious Soviets and Stalinists who supported the Nazis and worked with them. While, as he's pointing out, every effort to cobble together this internationalist, anti-fascist alliance was thwarted at every step by the Western capitalist powers because they were more than happy to have Germany continue to fight the Soviet Union, take the fight to the socialists and the communists in their society and elsewhere. But of course, yeah, all we ever want to talk about is the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which was a final, last-ditch effort to try and prevent a cataclysmic war, which obviously was unsuccessful.
That all the powers would join in to fight Hitler and contain him. The Western allies refused those overtures from the Soviet Union. Not because they were appeasers, not because they were simple and naive, quite the contrary, because they had a plan of their own, and that plan was Munich. And the plan was, we give Hitler Czechoslovakia and he goes east. And they were waiting for a war, and that war was supposed to come, and it was going to be Nazi Germany finishing off Bolshevik Russia. Just as they had sent armies in against Russia just a few years, less than a decade before, so they now plan to do the same. And so they've done again and again. And that war was fought, and most of it was fought on the Eastern Front. 7 out of every 10 German soldiers who died in that war died on the Eastern Front. The scale.
And these are the victims of communism that people like Jordan Peterson to this day hold up as some kind of black mark against socialism, when it's in fact a triumph. It's a triumph of socialism. The fact that they defeated fascists in this way. including the millions of Ukrainians that bravely and heroically and correctly fought alongside the Red Army to defeat fascism, whose legacy is being completely fucking spit upon to this day by these Western proxies that uphold and support the Ukrainian fascist sympathizers of the period.
The fighting was enormous. The battles of Kursk, Stalingrad, the Battle of Berlin. There's nothing like it that happened.
It is an influence on my look,
theater.
Sean. I won't deny it.
On the Western Front. In the Battle of Berlin, you saw 2 million German soldiers against 3.5 million attacking Soviet soldiers. The losses were stupendous. But at the end of that war, the Soviet Union emerged as...
Fucking people like Jordan Peterson and Evan Peters or whoever from CBC should be every single day thanking God, whatever God they believe in, that the Soviet Union existed. Saved the entire world from fascism. Who was the leader of the Soviet Union by that time? Oh yeah, by the way, let's look into that. I can't think of who it was at this time, but we should probably look into that. Every single one of us owes a massive debt of gratitude to the Soviet Union, not just for defeating fascism, but for leading the fight to institute a kind of social democracy in the West as well. The whole New Deal, our whole Canadian cherished universal healthcare system, which would not exist without the Soviet Union in the first place. Evan Dyer, sorry, Karnova. I'm already trying to forget this person exists. You know, people like anti-communists like Jordan Peterson should every day be thanking the Soviet leaders and soldiers that defeated the fascist threat.
A major power, very weakened, very much weakened, having lost most of its industries west of the Urals, having lost 20 million people. Most of its transportation, by the way, at that time was still by horse or oxen in most areas for most of its population, but it still had the Red Army. And yet it was not an army that had any intention of marching through Europe, although that was the NATO myth that was cultivated at the time. And there's an interesting set of documents that just came out in the American Historical Review which point out now that the West and the State Department never really believed that the Soviets were going to invade Western Europe. That was a myth which they consciously propagated. They knew that after an exhausting war, the last thing the Russian people would ever go for, or the Russian leaders themselves would ever go for, was another war. There was no sense, they had no interest in such a war. The war they fought against Germany was defensive, and they wanted to rebuild their country. That was a myth that was consciously propagated, that if we don't stop them, if we don't build NATO, if we don't double, triple, quadruple our defense forces, the Ruskies will be marching under the Arc de Triomphe. The point of all of what I've said so far is just to point out to you that the Cold War did not begin in 1947, but it began in 1917. That the Cold War has been going on even before the Russian Revolution, in the sense that the U.S. has been consciously, and other Western countries have been consciously suppressing any kind of revolutionary forces. When Ronald Reagan says that we've got to stop the Sandinistas and overthrow them because they are an extension of Soviet power, we might ask ourselves, we've been in Nicaragua 11 times, and at least 5 of those times there was no Soviet Union. We've invaded Costa Rica, we've invaded Haiti, we've invaded Mexico, and there wasn't the Soviet Union.
Talking about this excuse too, that's really worth pointing out as well, how anti-communism was the excuse to justify imperialist interventions, and the way that shifted over the years. Both, prior to the Soviet Union even existing, and then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, then you're getting involved in Latin America, not to defeat socialism or not to defeat the Soviet Union through these proxies, but to defeat the drug cartels, to defeat the drug trafficking, the war on drugs, right? The war on communism just transitions right into the war on drugs, and the same practices continue. And then it transitions into the war on terrorism to allow the same practices to continue. And now we're circling back to the war on to the anti-communism.
Invaded these countries long before there was a Soviet Union. It's not that they're surrogates of the USSR, but that they are developing revolutionary movements which will bring a competing social order, one that will use the land, the labor, the resources, technology, and capital in a different way for social need, communally, for non-profit, public sector development, rather than for private capital accumulation. This would mean the death of capitalism, of that class with its power and privileges, with life as they love it, and hold it, and will fight tooth and nail to defend it. As Mrs. Bush said, we enjoy our wealth. The U.S. empire at the end of World War II replaced Britain. The Brits were eased out of Iran. British oil companies were replaced by American oil companies. British sugar companies in Honduras were eased out by American sugar companies. And America also picked up the tab. America built a basis, an American empire, over 2,000 bases around the world, including about 300 major ones. American fleets are on every ocean. American planes fly the skies over every continent, almost. And so we see enormous investment in the third world, and with that enormous investment since World War II, an enormous growth in poverty.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about that yesterday, deletion
unusual,
quarter.
And that really goes against...
That's got to be COINTELPRO stuff, right? It's just got to be. That is Fed shit. Or people have just learned to do anti-communism or anti-solidarity wrecking themselves and are just unpaid interns for the CIA.
The accepted ideology, which is that attract investments in here because that'll bring prosperity and jobs, all that sort of thing. But what investment has brought to Haiti is the immiseration of the small Haitian farmers. What investment has brought in Latin America and most other countries has been the displacement of the peasantry, their proletarianization. They're being thrown into shanty towns to suffer poverty wages or chronic underemployment. What investment has brought with it also is increasing illiteracy, sickness, disease, poverty, and a dislocation and disfranchisement. A growing foreign debt and indebtedness, growing investment for cash crops. By the way, that's what the whole Mexican Revolution was about. Was the land going to belong to the Mexicans so they could grow beans and alfalfa and feed their people? Or was the land going to belong to the big sugar companies and latifundio owners so they could grow sugar to export as a cash crop to make more money, to yet make more money, or coffee or whatever else? And with that growth, with that investment comes a dislocation in the structure of the third world country, so that the whole infrastructure of it gets built around capital extraction. The economist Ray Brown, when he went to Cuba before the revolution, it was in 1958, he was there about a year or so before, was impressed by how every major road he saw went from a sugar plantation to a refinery to the seaport. While there were whole communities without roads that couldn't get to doctors, that couldn't have...
It's funny, like, I wasn't intending on watching this whole speech, and I still, it's an hour and a half long. I don't think we can do the whole thing. But, I mean, it is such... We're talking about debunking anti-communism. There's nothing better than this specific... Parenti himself, like in Black Shirts and Reds, or this specific speech to do that exact thing.
Schools, couldn't see a priest. The sugar companies had their roads. And when you send foreign aid to those countries, 9 out of 10 of those dollars goes to build the infrastructure, to subsidize the capital investment of the private corporations, or to pay for the police and the army of that country, not to defend it from foreign invasion, because Uruguay is not going to invade Bolivia, because Taiwan isn't going to be invaded by the Philippines. But they need those big armies to defend their rulers from their own people, because those people are in such a state of immiseration. So that's where our foreign aid goes. And as someone once said, foreign aid is when the poor people, that's us, of a rich country, give money to the rich people of a poor country. And when Kenneth Boulding gets up and he says, an economist, and you can see what you can see when you get brilliant people like Kenneth Boulding speaking so naively. You can see the troubles you get into, the swamps you go into, the baby talk, silliness you get into when you think without Marx, when you think without class analysis. And Kenneth Boulding says, one of America's leading economists, he says, empire is irrational because it costs more than what we get out of it. The British, it cost them more in India than what they got out of it. The American investment in the Philippines is only about $3.5 billion, but we had to give them about $6 billion in aid. It costs us more than what we get out of it.
We're not profiting. We do profit over imperialism, right? We do materially benefit from imperialism, but we're not the ones that are really profiting. The state is not the one that's really profiting, though. It's the multinationals that own the state. They profit immensely. The weapons contractors, they profit immensely.
And that's when you think without a class analysis. Because as we know, as you're going to know before the evening's over, that it's very profitable. Because the people who have the $3 billion investment aren't the same ones as the people who paid the $6 billion. As Thorsten Veblen said back in 1909, and Boulding should have read him even if he is a Marxist, as Veblen said, the wealth that's extracted from imperialism goes into the coffers of the select few, whereas the costs of empire are paid out of the common treasure of the people. And so it was with the British Empire in India. It was the Brits, the ordinary working people, who paid for the cost of empire. It was the Bank of England and the East India Trading Company that got the cream. And so with the Philippines, right, of course with a good skim to your collaborator, your comprador there.
I want to talk also as well about, because people uphold this, these kind of like patriotic socialists or whatever, uphold Parenti, who talks about how they're the people on the left, like we're the biggest patriots. You know, we're the ones that really love our country, and they use that to like uphold this idea that we have to be like waving the American or Canadian flag. That's what that quote means, or that we shouldn't support, you know, giving land back to indigenous people, or we shouldn't support anti-colonial struggles here, or we should deny our status as a settler colony, when really all Parenti's talking about when he talks about that is the fact that we're not the ones that benefit the most from these structures, and that actually overthrowing these structures and redistributing the wealth would benefit everybody. So it makes us the biggest patriots because we actually care about raising people's living standards in this country. That's the basic point that he's making. It doesn't mean, though, that we need to be like bigoted, or we need to be completely ignorant of the struggles of marginalized groups, or social justice or racial justice, or focused on things like indigenous rights or trans rights, because that runs contrary to this idea. Or we shouldn't, you know, talk about our country's role in upholding imperialism and committing violent murder and mass genocide elsewhere and around the world. That's not what that means. Yeah, I'm sure it is a psyop. He's reframing what it means to be a patriot, not what it means to be a communist. That's right, King Window. That's right. And they're LaRouchites, so yes. But I think it's important to push back on that, because people that claim to be socialist and try to suggest that we need to have some kind of socialist synthesis that includes waving around the American flag, the Canadian flag, or not supporting marginalized groups. And they uphold Parenti as someone that would agree with them, which I do not believe to be the case.
What he got just in shoes for his wife. God.
I think that's a good place to leave it. We got, 15, 17 minutes of that. Considering what we're talking about today is debunking anti-communism. I mean, there's no one better. There is no one better than our friend Michael. Friend of the stream, Michael Parenti. I wish you could email Parenti like Chomsky. Well, I don't know if I've ever told you, Matt, but I don't know if you were in the community at this time, but around when I started doing this stream, I tried to email Parenti. And I emailed his son, Christian, because it's really hard to find contact info for Parenti, or actually impossible. And Christian Parenti wrote me back and was like, I'm sure he would love to go on your program and talk to you, but he has cognitive issues. And he doesn't do public speaking anymore, doesn't do kind of interviews anymore, which is really sad. But it really like made me feel happy that Christian Parenti, when I was in contact with him about this, wrote back to me and he was like, but I will tell my dad that you were asking about him, and because I told him what a big influence he was on me in the community, and I was telling him about that, and he was like, I will tell my dad that you wrote and that you invited him on, and that you wanted to talk about this stuff, and he's going to be really thrilled that you were talking about him, and that you invited him, and that made me feel so proud. Just the fact that maybe Michael Parenti got a little moment where he got to smile and realize that there's people out here still talking about his work and talking about the things that he advocated for throughout his career. He was really kind of marginalized. He didn't become a big media figure. He had a career in academia, but his viewpoint was really marginalized. And it made me feel good to know that maybe he understands at this point that there's people still out there watching these speeches and reading his books and talking about, what his viewpoint. It seems like Parenti is more popular than ever. It seems like that as well. And a lot of people come from the Chomsky to Parenti pipeline, When Chomsky's analysis kind of puts you in certain paths of like anti-imperialism, but you run up to this wall in Chomsky's work, where he was also engaged in a lot of anti-communism and did not support, for instance, the Soviet Union. And in fact, when the Soviet Union collapsed, he wrote about that as being some kind of victory for humanity or democracy, and has been proven disastrously wrong on that. Whereas Parenti was continuing to uphold socialism and uphold actually existing socialism and upholding revolutions around the world, even when it was extremely unpopular to do so. And regardless of whatever mistakes and whatever they were messy or whether there were contradictions or there was violence, continued to uphold them. And as we've moved forward into this like new Cold War situation, that's been a huge source of inspiration for me. To not be squishy on these issues, or to not try and both sides these issues of imperialism. We've seen a lot of people get sucked into that path throughout this Ukraine-Russia conflict. And we've seen how that rapidly becomes ideologically incoherent. Especially in communist communities where most people come off as condescending nerds. Well, that's the amazing thing, right? Sykram, just how amazing of a communicator he is. And then how accessible he makes these ideas in the great tradition of, socialist writers and thinkers, including people like Mao and Lenin and Stalin. Making these ideas easy to understand for people. That's a big part of promoting this ideology. Huge source of inspiration for me, though, as we move into this new Cold War. When we see these imperialist powers putting together this massive propaganda campaign and a military campaign to try and encircle and destabilize China, and you've seen all these left-wing academics and journalists and intellectuals and authors being like, well, China's bad too, though. So, how does that help? How does that help anything? Of course I'm against imperialism, but we need to talk about the Uyghurs. Of course I'm against imperialism, but we need to talk about Hong Kong. We need to support Taiwanese democracy. We need to make sure we criticize Maduro and Ortega. We can't ever support, these or even give critical support to countries that are like under this constant imperialist assault. You know, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in trying to play that game. I don't think it helps anything. I don't think it helps anything to try and like both sides these issues. The Uyghur stuff makes it hard to talk about China in a positive light at all, and that's exactly why these narratives are promoted by people in the media and the political establishment. That's exactly why. Yeah, being talked about by the very same people that have like been perpetuated the war on terror and the bombing and murder and destabilization and displacement of like millions of Muslim people. I would say it was a propaganda coup to a certain extent, but also at the same time, you have to acknowledge that the whole narrative has fallen apart now. The entire narrative has completely collapsed. So even though it was, you could describe it as a successful propaganda coup. I mean, even the big imperialist media institutions are openly admitting that it's not anywhere near like what they were describing it as. Although, yeah, it worked on the people it needed to work on. That's true. That is true. But that's it. I just don't believe in playing this game. This both sides are bad game. Neither Washington nor Beijing. It was an incoherent position during the Cold War against the Soviet Union, neither Washington nor Moscow, and it's incoherent today. Especially if you live in the empire and benefit from it. The funniest thing about the anti-China escalation by the State Department is the fact that the U.S.'s official position is recognizant of the one China policy. Well, that was the amazing thing this summer with the whole like Pelosi visit to Taiwan, right? Where there's like, of course we recognize the one China policy. Of course we recognize that. But at the same time, you have China saying like, well, don't visit Taiwan. We're going to consider that a provocation to us, and we're going to consider it a complete reshaping of the one China policy. And America, on one hand, says, like, of course we recognize the one China policy, and then they go ahead with this visit, despite China very clearly stating that they would consider that a violation of the one China policy. And now McCarthy's going as well. And Taiwan is the next front in this new Cold War that they're trying to turn into a hot war. I mean, that's what they're trying to turn Taiwan right now into another Ukraine. They're pumping billions of dollars worth of arms into Taiwan right now and have been for decades, actually, which, of course, China considers a provocative act, as any country in the world would. Pumping arms into this country, having military bases in the country and around, completely encircling China, in South Korea, in the Philippines, 4 new military bases in the Philippines, opening in Japan, Okinawa, and elsewhere. You know, so we're trying to provoke a proxy war via Taiwan because our cowardly imperialists that run our culture can't know that they don't stand a chance to actually fight a shooting war with China. So they're just as they are terrified to fight Russia. So they're getting fucking proxies to do it for them, do their dirty work for them, do their killing for them, or act as cannon fodder to enforce their kind of hegemony. Let's look at some of the stuff that else I wanted to look at. How much time do we have? About another hour. So Ukraine is a proxy war, and they're trying to turn Taiwan into a similar situation. And fuck, this is just so grim. This is so fucking grim. Look at this clip. Like, this is stunning. And remember the Verhoeven I'm doing my part. Remember? Check this out. This clip is like horrible.
What?
This American journalist asking a Ukrainian teenager what it will be like going to the front to fight in an American proxy war. Look at this headline. Teens in Ukraine train for frontline warfare. And again, Western media has been telling us that, oh yeah, Ukraine's going to win this any day now. Ukraine's going to win this war against Russia any day. We just need to keep arming them and fighting them. Do you think this is a sign that Ukraine is doing well in this war, or they're close to winning? This is supposed to be like a positive news hit about teens in Ukraine being sent to this meat grinder on the front line of this war. Absolutely horrifying shit.
What does it mean to you, what you're learning how to do, and then actually having to go do it? Being out on the battlefield, you know better than kids your age what the reality is.
Have you witnessed the scariest part of our country, like Bucha, Kharkiv, Izium? Yeah?
Yeah.
So definitely I'm ready for that, but it's scary.
What does...
And he's talking about, he's talking about these highly publicized incidents of violence, using that to explain his willingness to go fight and die on the front lines. And again, I want to be sensitive about this stuff. I don't want to deny that the Russian military has done bad things in Ukraine or elsewhere. As always, though, just worth pointing out that in the CIA handbook for training these counter-revolutionaries in Latin America, in El Salvador, Nicaragua, and elsewhere, trained these people to commit horrible acts against civilians that they could use as like widely publicized propaganda incidents to radicalize people to continue the fight and to radicalize people around the world to support the proxy war. This is in the CIA playbook. And we know for a fact, now it's not a conspiracy theory, it's not Kremlin propaganda, we know for a fact that the CIA, as well as Canadian military establishment and intelligence and the British intelligence, have been arming and training these militia groups in eastern Ukraine for at least the last 10 years now. So we know that we know that the CIA has been training them. We know the kind of stuff that's in the CIA playbook when it comes to brutal attacks on civilians and using that as propaganda. So knowing that, by the way, that looks like a picture of Bandera back there. I don't know if it is, but it's pretty far away and blurry, so maybe give them the benefit of the doubt, but it does. Knowing that playbook and knowing that for a fact that the CIA has trained these groups, that's a fact. That's a factual statement. Knowing that, I think it would be not doing our jobs to question whether some of these highly publicized human rights atrocities that have been used to sell this war to people, we should at least be asking critical questions about how these incidents happened and who perpetrated them and why. And there should be an actual investigation in it, rather than just believing the first thing that we're told by these very people that are fighting this conflict. And I know that's kind of a tricky line to walk. And again, I want to be sensitive about this, but I think it's foolish knowing this playbook and knowing that the fact that these intelligence assets have been involved in this conflict. We need to ask those critical questions about these highly publicized human rights disasters, which are used in propaganda like this to sell the war, both to people in the country where the war is taking place and in the rest of the world. war is bad and terrible. There are no good guys. That said, thank you, Benny. It was good gaming with you today, Benny. Russia has been way more careful than the U.S. was in Afghanistan or Iraq. I mean, just you can compare the beginning of the conflict to the shock and awe that America unleashed on Baghdad at the beginning of the invasion on civilians. This massive bombing campaign, which I'm sorry to say, hasn't happened in Ukraine. But this is just so just this headline is so fucking disturbing. It is so disturbing. Yeah, Mike, and this is a good point as well. You'd think all the atrocities would make people realize that war is bad, actually, and maybe we should work to end it, but one side is covered as bad, and all the bad things are used to push for more war. Exactly. And the people that are calling for peace and dialogue and negotiations are framed as being like supporters of violence and genocide. That's how completely backwards this discourse is. Child soldiers for democracy and freedom. Again, it's the exact Verhoeven thing.
Young people from all over the globe are joining up to fight for the future.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part too.
They're doing their part. Are you?
And again, as we talked about the other day in our Verhoeven World segment, the whole satire of that, which is not really discussed in the movie, it's kind of in the subtext of the movie, is that the humans are getting their asses handed to them. And if you are forcing people or conscripting teenagers to fight in your war, it's actually a good sign that things are not going well, despite the fact that in our Western media, again, our supposedly free press Western media, we're fed this story that Russia's been humiliating themselves, they're losing, Ukraine's driving the Russian invaders away, completely distorting the reality of what's been going on and the prospects that Ukraine has had of actually winning this conflict, which has never been a possibility. I'm sorry to say. And people say that, like, not only should there not be dialogue or any effort to have negotiations, but also they're going to come and kick Russia out of Crimea as well. This is all fantasy. This is all just completely preposterous. That was never, ever a possibility. Yeah, and now we're promoting the fact that Ukraine is sending teenagers now to fight and die in this conflict. And still suggesting that there's a chance that they're going to prevail in the end. This sequence was straight out of Leni Riefenstahl's infamous Triumph of the Will, even that crane shot. It's really amazing how, like, watching it in the 90s when I was younger, obviously it's kind of lost on you, but it's amazing how thick, like, the satire is, where Verhoeven's literally saying, this is a fascist society. This is a movie about fascism, and still people like not getting that. You know, it's pretty amazing. That's what I was talking about Verhoeven the other day. It's like he beats you over the head with satire to the point that it's so obvious, but yet here we are living in Verhoeven world, and it seems tame in comparison to the actual propaganda that we're exposed to every day. Here's another
look at this.
I don't know who this journalist is. I didn't watch this whole clip before, but like, this is pretty incredible as well. This exchange here.
And say the reason
this
that
Pentagon
the Russian army is on NATO,
the
Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is because NATO has expanded rather than the Russians expanding. That, in other words, NATO has moved closer to Russia rather than Russia moving closer to NATO. Is that not an accurate way to look at this?
I think that's the way President Putin probably looks at it. It's certainly not the way that we look at it.
It's Kremlin propaganda suggests that NATO expanded.
NATO has expanded eastward toward Russia?
NATO has expanded,
okay.
and the expansion has been a good thing for...
So the reason that the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is not the fault of the Russian army, it's not the Russian army that's done it. It's NATO has moved closer to moved
I'm pretty
east.
sure it wasn't NATO who was ordering upwards of 15 battalion tactical groups to within 10 kilometers of the border with Ukraine. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't NATO.
Again, we've been pumping arms into this country for the last 10 years. It's not a Kremlin propaganda or a conspiracy theory. That's just the reality. That's what we've been doing. Pumping billions of dollars of arms into this country for 10 years. And they're saying the Russian buildup at the border just happened out of nowhere. It just happened out of nowhere. Always denying their own responsibility. Always, I didn't realize the music was still playing. Always denying and obfuscating their own responsibility.
Who put little green men inside Ukraine to destabilize eastern states.
I'm pretty sure that Ukraine is not a member of NATO. So unless that's changed,
it's not changed. But I'm pretty sure the movement by Russia is Russia.
Who's this fucking journalist?
NATO has moved east. The reason that the Russian army is closer or on NATO's doorstep is because NATO moved.
NATO is not an anti-Russia alliance. NATO is a security alliance.
That's literally exactly what it is.
For 50 years, it was an anti-Soviet alliance. So do you not understand it? So do you not understand how, or can you not even see how the Russians would perceive it as a threat? And the fact that it keeps getting closer to their border while their troops, I mean, the places where their troops are.
He's starting to malfunction now.
In Ukraine and Georgia are not NATO members.
I'm not going to pretend to know what goes in President Putin's mind or Russian military commanders. I mean, I barely got a history degree at the University of South Florida.
You don't even fucking know.
What I can tell you is
you don't even fucking know. And again, this is the level of understanding of these issues that people have in the military establishment and in our media and in politics, and promoted by people like Evan Dyer, whoever it is. He doesn't even fucking know.
That NATO is a defensive alliance. It remains a defensive alliance.
Fair enough, but it has moved east, correct? I mean, that's just a fact.
It has expanded, absolutely.
Right, exactly.
But there's no reason for anybody to think the expansion is a hostile or threatening move.
Oh, America. Of course, America would never perceive something like that as a threat. If there was rival countries just building military bases, ever encroaching on their borders every few years, bringing more and more people into this country to build military bases and aim nuclear weapons at their country, would never perceive that as a threat. Weasley little liar, dude. Yeah. I love that you can dunk on these assholes with basic history knowledge. Well, and this is the problem that we've run up to. Just the fact that we can't even talk about the real, not the Kremlin propaganda or conspiracy theory. Well, we just can't even talk about the very real, obvious history. We can't even agree on what that history is. According to these people, and not just people with the fucking Pentagon or the media, but even people on the left. In the independent leftist media space, you promote this idea that history is basically like just basic recent history. George Monbiot of The Guardian was doing this the other day. We looked at his deranged tweets about this the other day. Just stating basic facts about what happened in the context leading up to this invasion is like Kremlin propaganda. As people like George Monbiot and Owen Jones, like people that have like left-wing personas and big media platforms, promoting this idea that just talking about the basic factual context of how this invasion started is Kremlin propaganda. So it's not just people at the Pentagon, it's widespread people that have this viewpoint, that just completely denying the factual history that we know about.
And we've been saying that throughout the last 15 years, man.
You're moving closer to Russia. You're blaming the Russians for being close to NATO.
No.
That's exactly what Hegel said.
We're blaming the Russians for violating the territorial integrity of Ukraine and destabilizing the security situation
which is not a NATO member. Which is not a NATO member.
I see
other countries feel threatened. Yeah.
Amazing. I don't know who this fucking journalist is. It's amazing to see an American journalist actually like talk to someone like that. I don't think this interview aired on CNN, or I don't think this aired in too many places. Matt Lee from the AP. Shout out to Matt Lee. I'm actually going to give him a follow right now. Amazing clip, though. Amazing clip. How completely flummoxed these people get just by stating basic facts. Basic facts about NATO expansion. Really amazing stuff. Do I have anything else about this? You know what? I will talk about this. On this subject, you know, I was a big Chapo Trap House fan a couple years ago. Don't really listen much to the podcast anymore. But I thought the freak out about their statements as well, about this Nord Stream pipeline, and the freak out of people like Jim Stewartson, anti-fascist, anti-disinfo activist, radicalized pod co-host. He's got Black Lives Matter and Slava Ukraini in the bio. Amazing. Retweeting this post-left watch account about this Nord Stream pipeline. Says that America destroyed the Nord Stream pipelines and that it's the only explanation. You don't even need a fucking Seymour Hersh to tell you that, which I've also been saying on here.
One more. The other big story this week, the Seymour Hersh piece about the Nord Stream pipeline attack. Big surprise, we did it.
No.
Would it shock you? Would it shock you to find out that we blew up that pipeline?
That's a completely irrational explanation. I think it makes much more sense that it was a random event that neither government did.
Yeah, the pipe just blew up. It happens sometimes, you know? I mean, honestly, maybe. Who knows? No, if anybody blew it up, it was us. I mean, it's ridiculous. You don't even need a fucking Seymour Hersh to tell you that. Who else did it? If it had been the Russians, we would only hear about it. It would be the only story. It would still be the only thing anyone talked about. The fact that it was like, oh, the Nord Stream pipeline blew up, and then no one talked about it ever again.
Yeah.
Is all you need to know who fucking blew it up.
Yeah, and also the fact that nobody because Seymour Hersh published this on like Substack or like they spoke and they're talking about they're like blogger Seymour Hersh publishes wacky conspiracy theory. It's like the guy broke the My Lai massacre and a dozen other and the fucking Abu Ghraib torture shit.
Yeah, I don't even know. I didn't read it. I
believe it.
Yeah.
There's not much more to say.
Who else is
going
to do it? Who else is going to blow up the fucking pipeline? Give me a break. You got to take this seriously. You got to pretend that there's multiple live options here, when everything about what happened and then afterwards conforms to only one explanation for what occurred. Give me a break. Get out of here.
So that was very upsetting to post-left watch.
One more. The other big
post-left watch, and then this guy saying Chapo Trap House is a Kremlin propaganda operation responsible for brainwashing and traumatizing a huge swath of the left with Gamergate trolling. Half the reason Bernie Bros ever existed are these sociopaths. Their job is to convince leftists to blame Hillary, not the Russians. When someone else said, this is amazing. Why did Chapo suddenly appear 6 months before the 2016 election to run damaging propaganda on Hillary Clinton? Why do they torment anyone who mentions Russia? It's a mystery. We have to stop being so naive and call a psyop a psyop. Why did a podcast pop up in the run-up to one of the most historic and influential American elections in modern history? It's just a mystery. It's just a complete mystery. How did this happen? And they don't like Hillary? It must be Kremlin propaganda. That must be the reason. And again, I don't think Chapo Trap House needs me to defend them. I think they're doing just fine. I've had my own issues, not really with the guys in the podcast, but with people in the fandom and people that they're connected to that I don't really like very much and have been extremely shitty to me personally. But the reality is it's fucking preposterous to suggest that there's anything controversial about this viewpoint, first of all, that America blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, which is an obvious truth to anyone that's paid remote attention to this. And or the idea that the fact that they have a podcast that's criticizing like the Democratic Party from the left that came up in the run up towards the Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton election is like an example of why it's Kremlin propaganda. It's just fucking nonsense. Completely preposterous. The only way you can have a negative opinion on Hillary is if you were brainwashed to hate Hillary Clinton. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Again.
A couple questions.
Again.
Diplomacy is the very best way forward for all sides. We both agree, including best for Russia, in our view. And we have made it very clear we're ready to continue talks in good faith with Russia. Germany has also been a leader in pushing de-escalation of tensions and encouraging dialogue through the Normandy format. If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
I missed the other part though. The other part is even better, with the knowing smile from Biden. That's even better.
Will now take
a military aggression against Ukraine. Swift measures.
The border. There will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly? Since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control.
We will. I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
And these fucking people, these disinfo experts tell you that it's like the only way that you could think the U.S. is destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline is because you believe some Kremlin conspiracy theory. God, it's funny. Like, it's just unbelievable. It's so great. Look at his face. Look at Biden's face. This could be a good emote, actually. I already have one Biden mad emote, but his face here is fucking terrific. Anyway, I've had my run-ins with people connected to Chapo, not the from what I've talked about with the actual guys on the show. They've always been fine with me. I had Will Menaker on my podcast a couple years ago. And he was very generous, and I enjoyed talking to him. I've had my run-ins with people like in their circle who have come after me in some pretty fucked up ways that have totally fucking traumatized me. Even though, of course, the beefs are squashed. We have no more beefs with anybody, obviously, as you know. But regardless, I think suggesting that they're engaging in conspiracy theory, Kremlin propaganda bullshit for pointing out this obvious truth is fucking hilarious. Fucking hilarious. It's now a beef-free zone. That's right. Except with certain, mainstream Canadian journalists, like we saw today. We've had some mild beefs, but it's all very friendly. All very friendly. I should go soon, folks. I should go soon. I guess my joke didn't land. It's because, John, I didn't know if it was a joke or whether you were being serious. And it kind of stressed me out, which I know was not your intention. Folks, just a few generous chatters could get us closer to the sub goal today. Just a few generous chatters. Not only do I not have a mainstream media platform in Canada or elsewhere, I also don't have the massive support that a podcast such as Chapo Trap House does. What I do have, though, are the very incredible, kind and generous viewers of this stream and listeners and supporters of this community. So if you enjoy the content that I put out here every single day here on twitch.tv, please subscribe or give subs. A few generous chatters could get us to the goal line today. This is the last stream of the week. I will not be here tomorrow. So if you're holding off on a sub, you will not have an opportunity tomorrow. You will not. So if you want to support the content that I do here on Twitch, please subscribe or gift subs. Help me make the number go up and help me continue to keep this content on the air. I'm glad to know you're getting your hoodie tomorrow. That's great. I mostly appreciate Chapo, but I'm skeptical of some of the people they've platformed, and I think their fan base can be weirdly defensive in ways that are sometimes quite nasty.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Yeah. Thank you, Admiral Praxis, for the 2 gifted subs. Thank you. Is there a link to merch? Yes, there is. A lot of gamer word people in the fan base. I don't want to speak to that. I don't want to, in fact, even so, sometimes I get tempted in moments like this to recount the history of some of the shit that I've had to hear from some of these folks. I would just rather not do it. I would rather not. I would rather stay away from it. It is a no beef zone, folks. It's a no beef zone. And again, just I credit those guys for inspiring me to do the stuff that I'm doing today. I don't think I would be doing what I'm doing today if I wasn't inspired, not exclusively by them, but partially, definitely in like 2016, listening to Chapo and watching, Michael Brooks and Sam Sater, they all really, and Hassan as well, and seeing Hassan and what he was doing, this has all been really has contributed to me trying to do this kind of stuff as well, doing this kind of commentary. I do think, Old Dutch, I'll say this about what your comment was, that I do think there are people in that fandom that have weird, unhealthy parasocial relationships with them. And again, try and act like them, but without any of the humor or any of the actually interesting contributions, and just, engaging in a kind of very reactionary and hostile attacks on people. I don't know.
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Gen X Bushy, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Gen X Bushy, for the 5 gifted subs. I have weird parasocial relationships with all of you in here. No exceptions, except it's not weird, and it's not parasocial either. It's real. It's real friendship. That's what's different. That's what's different about it. It's the Friendship Triangle. It's not parasocial. And we're normal, and we're nice people. The cloud trickles down. Thank you. Yes. Yes, it does. It was a good one today, Johnny. It was a good stream. It was a good stream. We missed you in chat. The only real trickle-down theory that works. That's right. So, folks, one final opportunity to subscribe to this program and help support this content and help keep this content on the air. 2 generous chatters, or even 1 extremely generous chatters. 1 extremely generous chatter could, in theory, get us across the finish line. But overall, this has been a wonderful week of streaming. I've had a wonderful time hanging out with each and every one of you. Again, I absolutely love doing this stream and doing this show and having this community. I would like to also be able to do this and also have like a salary, as I was talking about earlier, and not have to rely on like the extreme generosity of people like in the community. I would rather not have to kind of have this arrangement, but this is the dilemma that I'm faced with. And I cannot raid. Are there other ways to support that bypasses the 50-50 rev split? I mean, there's Patreon. There's giving tips. Like you can use the !donate command to do tips as well. It just unfortunately like the reality is that most of my, even with the 50-50 revenue split, most of my income comes from Twitch, even with the massive chunk that they take out of that. So there are ways that bypass that are good, but ultimately I still do have to make number go up every single day. One of the reasons I really want to grow this channel, this year, is so I don't have to like lean on this shit so much, and I don't have to always talk about this, which I hate. It's by far my least favorite thing about doing this stream. Twitch.tv has received multiple reports of Stalinist content on your channel and has limited some of your account features. It's my least favorite thing to do on this stream. It's unfortunately necessary. I would like to grow this community to a point where we don't have to like talk about it so much. Jeez. Anyway, friends, thank you for all the support. Thank you for everyone for hanging out this week. I hope you have a good weekend. I don't think I'll be streaming tomorrow. My plans are a little bit up in the air, but I don't think I'll be streaming. I will be back on Monday. That's all. That's all for now, friends. Have a great weekend. Thanks again. Goodbye.